Good afternoon, everyone. I am Rudy L. Khoury, Dean of the School of Architecture. It's my honor to welcome you to this gathering in celebration of Professor Teofilo Victoria, a remarkable educator, architect, and visionary who left a very deep mark on our school, our students, and the broader world of architecture. Teofilo was a formidable presence, brilliant, passionate, uncompromising when it came to the things he believed in. He wasn't content with merely teaching architecture. He wanted his students to live it, to feel it, to be consumed by the ideas that drive it. More than anything, he wanted to share his belief in the transformative power of beauty through architecture. He pursued this belief with a singular obsession, one that fueled his lectures, his projects, his conversations, and his lifestyle. It resonated in his buildings and other lofty endeavors, as well as the minutiae of everyday life, inspiring countless of students who carry forward his passion in their own practices today. Perhaps nowhere was this passion more evident than in the Open City Studio, the study abroad program that he led with his usual panache. For Teofilo, these journeys, especially to Tokyo and Kyoto, weren't just about exposing students to the world, they were about shaping how they experience the world, how they thought about architecture and the city. Those who traveled with him often returned accordingly transformed. Indeed, his most enduring legacy may lie in the generations of students he mentored, many of whom have very important positions in the field. They are the carriers of his vision, embodying his commitment to life as an aesthetic project, and his deep appreciation for the grace and meaning that architecture can bring to this project. Finally, I would like to extend my thanks to everyone who made the Festschrift and exhibition in the adjacent gallery possible. Our contributors, faculty, staff, students, and the many supporters who helped bring this Festschrift and exhibition to life. In particular, I would like to thank Professor George Hernandez and Carrie Penabad, the ICAA and the Coral Gable Museums, the Victoria and LaGuardia families for making all this happen. Thank you all for being here today to celebrate a life so passionately dedicated to the pursuit of architecture and education. And now I turn to Professor Hernandez, who will take this from here.
Good afternoon again. I would like to enthusiastically thank the Dean for his support, without which this wouldn't have happened. And he realized the merits of the idea early and supported it vigorously. And the many who made it happen, the committee for its insight, which was invaluable early on, the staff, in particular Nora Gay Benton, who was our Deus ex machina, moving the action along, as you know what I mean. The students, as always, pitching in, the speakers, mentors, colleagues, and friends of Teofilo. A special, my wingman, Stephen Fett, wherever he might be. And a special recognition to Carrie Penabad, who curated the beautiful exhibition and did so actually with her magic wand in a very brief amount of time. But most of all, as a school, and in that I include all the generations of those graduated, I want to thank you, Maria, for being a dutiful alumnus, a friend, ever a supporter of this institution, and, well, a bulwark of strength and support during these months. Thank you. We dedicate this to you. We honor him in it, but we dedicate this to you. So what is a Festschrift? Thank you. So what is a Festschrift? This crazy word that I still don't know how to pronounce. Too many D's and T's and R's without a vowel or interceding. It's a stodgy, glorious, old academic tradition, and in that the weather has cooperated. Maybe from, who knows, Germany, England, something like that. And it's meant, well, it's meant to be a book, which this is not yet, but it usually starts as this in the oral tradition. And so we have committed to continue after today to make it one. Maria oftentimes, and the many times I called her after these months of planning, would say he was never happier than when he was planning a symposium followed by a book. Right? I said, got it. So here we are. And it's not meant to mourn. That time is over. It's meant to celebrate and to honor and to remember, because it is the attempt is to trace the outreach of his influence, graph the topography of his intellect, and keep him living and amongst us in the way he cherished the most in this world, which universities provide. So with no further ado, I get to introduce the first speaker. The rest self-introduce, because we have many, and we do have time. We can't dispense of time in this interior. Still, we'll figure it out one day. It's my honor to present our previous dean, Elizabeth Platter-Zyberg, and Andres Noani's partners in more than one way.
Good afternoon. I'm among those privileged to have shared a decade of teaching administration and design with Teofilo Victoria. And looking back on it, I do think of it truly as a privilege. I am charged with giving a beginning to that academic trajectory, which I will do by reading a note that Robert Davis, the developer of Seaside, and possibly one of Teofilo's earliest clients. And when Robert heard about our loss of Teofilo, he wrote as follows. And the first piece of it is a quote. "England expects every man to do his duty," quote unquote. That was spoken by Admiral Nelson in 1805 at the Battle of Trafalgar. Robert writes, "This message, sent by telegraph from Andres Duani, convinced Teofilo Victoria, the son of an admiral in the Colombian Navy, that Andres and the night crew were not returning back to Seaside for him, that he had indeed been left behind to serve as town architect for the remote outpost that was to be Seaside. For the 10 days prior, he had helped lay out the town plan on paper and as a very large sand castle. But the actuality on the ground at that time, 1982, was one block of a dirt street and 3 houses, one of them a tiny sharecropper's cabin that would be Teofilo's home. Teofilo was a member of the night crew, a group of young architects, many of them students at the University of Miami, who worked on the Seaside Plan and Code at night in the offices of DPZ. The night crew and Liz and Andres were paid with lots on Tupelo Circle. They were required to build a house on each lot before selling the property. Thus, we, Robert and Daryl, hoped to get 2 works of art from each recipient, a town plan and a house of some distinction. And I should point out that a number of the night crew are here present today. Liz and Andres satisfied their building requirement by moving the sharecropper's cabin, Teofilo's home, to their site. This tiny building, sometimes referred to as Appalachia because it was up a small dune rise, was Teofilo's home. In time, he would be joined by, and some of them may be here, Ernesto Buch, Douglas Dwani, Deborah Burke, Victoria Casasco, and other off-and-on members of the night crew, and young people who wanted to visit. Quite a few of them designed their first buildings there. Most of them, including Teofilo, went on to distinguished careers as practitioners and teachers. Teofilo and Ernesto, among other collaborations, converted the Shrimp Shack, an 8-foot square plywood shack, into the classicized Tempieto Gamberia, a temple to shrimp, the name of which was a play on Villa Gamberaya, ne Villa Lante, among our favorite Renaissance works of architecture and landscape design. The two also designed the quote-unquote Workers' Club, a changing room west of the Seaside Grill that would serve residents of Seaside who did not have a neighborhood beach pavilion. It is now part of Bud and Alley's. The Tempieto is part of a store called Pickles. Teofilo had a unique sense of style, as well as a unique deadpan sense of humor. Consistent with his quasi-military role, he wore long, multi-pocketed shorts that were military surplus from tropical third world countries. I think many of us have that image forever in our minds. And this became one of the harbingers of the seaside style, though few could carry off the look like Teofilo. The night crew would never agree on a plan for the house on their lot, nor a financing plan, not surprisingly, Robert writes. They were given a waiver from the building requirement, but because it had taken them over a decade to conclude that they could or would not build, the proceeds of the sale of the lot were sufficient to pay off all their student debt. Obviously, that was a long time ago. Debt was a different situation. Eventually, Teofilo returned to Miami, completed his graduate studies at Columbia, and became a distinguished professor of architecture and urban design at Miami, with visiting professorships at Cornell and Harvard, where he was sometimes referred to as Professore Enigmatico. His deadpan humor made it hard for most of us to tell whether he was serious about anything. His unwillingness to take himself seriously endeared him to all of us, privileged to know him. This from Robert and Darrell Davis, among his first clients. Thank you. I have to go back. Sorry.
I don't know anything.
No.
So I vouch for that. It's perfectly accurate, exactly accurate. And actually it overlaps very much with what I was intending to, the reminiscences that I have, which are really verbal snapshots. You know, things that I remember visually and that I can describe verbally. Back in my first year of teaching was 1975. I was probably 25 and Teofilo was probably 22 or 21, something like that. And all I can describe at that time is that he was exactly the same as you knew him 40 years ago. The same posture, the same ironic sense of humor, etc. It is possible that if his parents were still alive, they could vouch for the fact that he was born that way. But there's a consistency to Teofilo that there is, it's almost like overlaid slides. It's always the posture, always the extremely wry sense of humor, which unlike most Latins was short on words, most welcome. And he was my student. I don't remember what his project was like, but I do remember calling his house one day, and he responded, he picked up the phone and said, "La residencia del contraalmirante Victoria a sus órdenes," which meant the house of Vice Admiral Victoria, I await your orders. And this, I think people don't know, but he's the son of a vice admiral, and he attended a Naval Academy before coming to architecture. And I think if you remember his posture and the way he moved, it was actually a military bearing. And I think that had an effect, not only culturally in his house, but now don't imagine the house was like that. The admiral was a wonderful, fun guy, as were his parents, but he was a vice admiral. Teofilo tells the story of being a cadet in a Colombian ship and a British destroyer docking next to him. And he had never seen a military ship that wasn't rusted. And he had never seen sailors that had ironed uniforms. And he said he never wanted to experience that. Again, that embarrassment. Anyway, the second snapshot I have is Teofilo at a little bit after the charrette of which was just described. This is the charrette at Seaside. Teofilo's in the front. We were in the swamp. There were snakes. And Ernesto Buch is the last one on the row. And that's Luis Treyes with the short pants and on the door of the, and this, we were walking on water. That's the kind of place that we were at. So the charrette took place. No, let me just go back. He contrived to find a job at Arquitectónica very, very early. We were building the first high rises in Miami. And the reason he got the job is that the palace was on the drawing boards, the tallest building south of Atlanta. And he said, and he convinced Bernardo, he was a great film buff and a great film expert, Teofilo. He said, "We will make a film of this." That allowed him to go smoke outdoors whenever he wanted. And I remember seeing him, we had a storefront at the time, and Teofilo would be doing like this many times a day, like that, like this. And Bernardo would say, or Lorinda would say, "What's he doing? He's not working." He said, no, he's thinking about the film. Of course, the film didn't happen. But those of you who did not see Teofilo smoke a cigarette, because later in life he stopped, have no idea the elegance, the repertoire of somebody that really knows how to hold a cigarette. It was just remarkable. So many things, filterless, perfect. The other anecdote was after, Arquitectónica, he was working actually on very early designs of Seaside, and he said, "I'm going to New York, don't move anything." He went to graduate school and then to Rome before he came back. He says, "I'll be back." He neglected to tell us how many years he would be away. And we did hold out with his drawings and his equipment for months and months. Eventually we said he's not coming back. And I didn't hear from him for months, but I do remember Hania Victoria, his sister, saying, he needs a little money to buy linguini. That's the only message we received. And everything is encapsulated in that. I remember that linguini, he must be really dragging the anchor. And then at Seaside, which Robert was speaking about, the charrette of Seaside, in which actually Luis Treyes was there, Victoria Casasco, who is attending, was there, Ernesto Buch was there. But they arrived. We had contrived people willing to work for nothing, and we assembled the team. And Teofilo and Victoria Casasco and somebody called Dan Brogi came in from New York. And at the time, there was nothing there. It was sand and brush. and a bunch of really what could only be described as hippies, rural hippies. And the car arrived, and three creatures stepped out with white shirts, buttoned to the top, male and female, both, white shirts, and wraparound glasses, exactly like John Belushi in what was the Blues Brothers. They all came out as Blues Brothers, like that. And I remember standing like this, you know, kind of in the middle, greeting them, and the dozen very excited locals looking at each other, coming out of the car, these people in black trousers. I mean, it was a remarkable scene like that, and vice versa. It was like Martians meeting. And of course, it's where we all became friends forever. But the cultural clash was right there. And Robert is right. When we were done with the charrette, Robert said, I need somebody to begin implementing. Nobody wanted to stay. There was nothing there to do. And because Teofilo was always late, the rest of us just got in the car and left them behind. And I remember him saying, I don't know whether it's the rear view mirror or my looking back, and Teofilo going in the middle of the road. What happened? And I did write him later because, of course, as a naval man, I said, England expects, I'd forgotten completely that anecdote, England expects every man to do his duty. And then we didn't hear from him, but he did build his two first buildings there, and they were absolutely austere, beautiful little things. They're still around. The anecdote after that was when he was teaching, the night crew was really in full action, the night crew. And the night crew actually set off from the University of Miami at night. We would have discussions. And the solvent, what caused us to gather here, there were two aspects. One is that people didn't draw on computers. So you couldn't go home. You actually needed a table to draw. And most students did not have a full table at home, the way you can now just work at home. So the school was full, and the cars were parked where the Ocalés on the plaza. That was the parking. And there's nothing more sociable than a trunk full of architecture books that you can pull out and show to people laying on the hood of the car. And this is a lesson. Actually, the program is more important than the beauty. Of course, the thing is infinitely more beautiful. But those trunks full of books and those that you could open, the big books, the old big books, and we could open them and discuss. And in those, Teofilo actually established a great number of the standards that actually created the school for that particular period. And I think there's a couple worth mentioning. One is that he knew how to keep us going by making extremely controversial statements, which cause arguments. He understood that what catalyzes conversation is arguments. And I remember once saying, the one-story city, he would say that. No explanation. The one-story city, implying it's the best. And of course, Luis and everybody else, the Latins would say, what about Rome? What about Paris? And Teofilo's form of argument was to repeat the one-story city. There was no discourse. He would repeat it until you got it. And he would just keep saying it until finally he said, yeah, the one-story city. And I remember several times thinking, damn, that was smart. I didn't get it at the time, but now I'm a great advocate of the one-story city with the periodic high-rise, which is actually almost exact, and I could go on about that forever. But that kind of thing, the ability to cause a discourse, but not randomly, but actually in a worthwhile way. The other thing he did, which was subtle, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, he had a subtle way of guiding the discussion in juries. Now, the old University of Miami is as diverse as it is now, but everybody was old. We had the old people that believed in concrete prefabrication. We had the old people that were, they had been in India, and they were the early environmentalists because actually no one could afford electricity. So we had all these people. but he kept saying, the Caribbean city, the Caribbean city, the Caribbean city. And those two words, the Caribbean city, converged everybody into the discipline of urbanism, the standard of judgment. I mean, there were people, what do we care about concrete prefabrication? What do we care about whatever you did in India under the British? You know, we had all these faculty, but the fact that he would guide us back to the Caribbean city, and that was the discipline of the city and the discipline of the Caribbean culture. You know, and everything that has to do with the Caribbean, the wonderful sensuality, the magic realism of which you can see all over these drawings, the magic realism, the incredibly forgiving weather that actually allows modern architecture to be marvelous. And all architecture is better in the Caribbean. Look at this campus. You know, it's in the Caribbean. And that discipline, and for a while, there was a scuola here, a school of architecture, which is what attracted Vincent Scully, who of course had every possible invitation after he retired from Yale. He was the most famous professor of architecture in the United States, and he came here, where he had never been before. But he could see that there was a scuola. And those of you who are here now should actually read Vince and Tappy's essay in the book Between Two Towers, because that is actually the substantial underlying discourse behind all the drawings that you will see today. That was Teofilo. And I say one thing, by the way, I saw him very little because Miami disaggregates people. I saw him very, very little, stupidly. But every time I saw it, I learned something, and it was incredibly amusing. And probably the lesson that can leave you behind, just hang around with your friends. You know, don't let Miami undermine your willingness to get together, the very small sacrifice to drive to get together for the purposes of just getting together. Because what I regret most is how little time I spent with him. And so just work against the urbanism of Miami and get together with your friends. Thanks.
I'm going to read a letter which is not in the program, only because it came to light just weeks ago. And it's a recommendation, perfectly dovetailed into Andres's final comment by Vincent Scully, written in 1991. Looking over Teofilo Victoria's resume, I am struck, not for the first time, by the range of subtlety of Mr. Victoria's mind. He is clearly a scholarly intelligence of the first order. At home in literature, as in architecture or the history of art. I am sure that he is a teacher of the first rank. Mr. Victoria is also a first-class architectural designer. His Kasdif is, in my opinion, a true masterpiece. A masterwork in the sense of the word, signifying a work that marks the passage of a young artist into full mastery of his art. I have always been impressed by Mr. Victoria. I love his wit, his wonderfully comic gift, the sense of wonder that so clearly fills him, and I am sure that he will continue to grow in his profession as a teacher. He will always be a fine human being. Thank you. Yeah, so that's a preamble. So my name is Jorge Hernandez, a professor of University of Miami School of Architecture and a friend of Teofilo's. I met Teofilo, if only briefly, while interning at a nascent architectural firm, Arquitectónica International, in 1978. So far, the facts line up. Our paths soon diverged, then intersected once more when I joined the faculty 10 years later. We engaged in the cautionary ritualistic sizing up that faculty cohorts tend to practice. But soon enough, the guard was down and we, now colleagues, began to collaborate. At first, the school's Venice program, where we endeavored to teach Italians a thing or two about Palladio. Then, at the invitation of John Stephian, the father of our school, off to a summer studio in a barn in New London, Connecticut, with an ensemble of young faculty, some here present, though young no more, that, well, quite frankly, outnumbered the students. There is where we began to put together the pieces of the pedagogy for this traveling studio, and met Vincent Scully and Catherine Lynn. The following summer, in the Yucatan, where one day I found myself alongside him in Uxmal, atop a pyramid, at noon, in a drizzle, surrounded by jungle, during a solar eclipse under a purple sky. And that's how it was with him. Anything but boring. One could say we grew up together as faculty, Teo and I, and after the run of years, the friendship grew into a kinship that became, well, fraternal, and filled with adventures and misadventures. More recently, it was our custom to park in the far reaches of the Snake Lot, a self-imposed Siberian assignment that permitted us to talk and stroll past more parked cars, and finally reach the school's courtyard, part ways to our respected classrooms and teach studio. We talked of many things: the news of the day, the politics of the school, the purpose of adding a tonus to the proportion of an octave. But there was one thing we talked about most often: buildings and books. Not as a conjunctive, rather a unanimous singularity. The inseparable worth of the grunt and the gesture, the hieroglyph and the sphinx, antithesis and emphasis, word and image as co-conspirators in the games of meaning across times. Though shortened for today, this talk presents a novel reading of one of Professor Victoria's favorite monuments, Jefferson's design for the campus of the University of Virginia. The catalyst for this new perspective is understood through the lens of one of Jefferson's final designs, that of his funerary monument at Monticello. So to honor him for this occasion, I dusted off an old survey, an old essay, and began years ago in Charlottesville, and finished it with him in mind. On the grave, this is a quote, "On the grave, a die or cube of 3 feet without any moldings, surmounted by an obelisk 6 feet in height, each of a single stone. On the face of the obelisk, the following inscription, and not a word more. Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, father of the University of Virginia. Because by these as testimonials I have lived, I wish most to be remembered." 3 testimonials, 2 texts, 1 architectural project. The first, a manifesto that breathed life into a revolution that established the nation and changed the world. The second, law, that freed the matters of religious affiliation from the matter of state. The third, an architectural project designed to establish an institution with every detail: the program, the principles, the branches of learning, the site selection, the building design, the detailing, all for a place in which to educate and shelter their students within for generations to come. Early in 1910, Jefferson wrote to a friend, recommending that colleges should not be housed in one large building, as in William and Mary, but in an ensemble of smaller ones assembled on the land. This, he argued, would foster community, better health, and prevent the spread of fire. Loss by fire marked Jefferson's life. It took his birthplace, Shadwell, in 1770, and with it his first library. In 1815, he sold his second and comprehensive collection of over 6,700 volumes, with numerous works on architecture, which was among the largest in the nation. The sale was necessary to rebuild the National Library, burnt by the British in the War of 1812. His third library, also voluminous, was sold piecemeal at his death. He was a bibliophile. By the time he was admitted to college in William and Mary, 1760, he'd already received an education in the classics from Reverend Dr. Mari, near Shadwell. He was proficient in English, Spanish, French, Italian, Greek, and Latin. His father, Peter Jefferson, the Albemarle County surveyor, taught him early on to survey the forms of lands and draw them as settings of towns and wilderness in Virginia. While at Williamsburg, the Royal Governor Fauquier and law professor Wythe and William Small, the professor of mathematics and moral philosophy, invited the young student to join their circle, a salon of sorts. There he was exposed to the fine arts and excelled in music and the study of architecture. He entered the practice of law in 1767 and embarked on his long, prestigious life in public service. After his final term as president, he retired to Monticello, his home and architectural laboratory, to start in earnest the project of the university. He had been thinking and planning the university long before 1817, when the site was purchased, or rather when the purchase of the site was ratified. Soon afterward, he laid the cornerstone for Pavilion 7 with Presidents Madison and Monroe. Because the event served as publicity for fundraising, Pavilion 7 was designed to appeal to the prevailing British taste. Benjamin Latrobe and William Thornton, architects of the nation's capital, were often tapped for design critiques and inspiration. A letter to Thornton shows an early sketch of a large quadrangle of about 800 feet. It was to be open on the fourth side, the space extending indefinitely, Jefferson's word, not infinitely, to the horizon. Along the enclosed sides, he proposed separate pavilions, each for each professor in his school. Between these rows of dormitories were united by a colonnade. The pavilions were to show themselves above the dormitories and be models of taste and good architecture and of a variety of appearance, no two alike, so as to serve as specimens for the architectural lectures. When Jefferson surveyed the land more closely, he found the slopes rising from the north, east, and west to the pinnacle of the hill. From there, a gentle slope descended southward. Jefferson revised his scheme to integrate to the topography, and introduced 2 rows of dormitories, placing a rotunda, Latrobe's suggestion. Oops, sorry. One second. So Latrobe's suggestion at the summit. Along the outer east and west ranges were the dormitories at the base of the hill. He placed the dining halls there and employed a vernacular language of low-slung arches that screened the terrace gardens upwards through the steep slope to the lawn. For the rotunda, Jefferson selected a half-scale model of the Pantheon to serve as his library for the university. His drawings are both freehand and drafted, and on graph paper imported from France. The front, always an image. The back, copious notes, footnoting the sources of the orders, the modules and proportions of the elements, the materials and quantities, and sometimes even calculations of costs. The dome room served as both library and planetarium, with bookcases radiating outward from behind the paired columns to the outer walls. The section shows a novel introduction of a mezzanine and 2 subsidiary floors not found in the Roman original. These lower-level classrooms, configured as elegant oval spaces with a sinuous hourglass-shaped hall for circulation, were unique indeed. Jefferson had no qualms employing the exterior of the Pantheon and departing from its harmonious interior to accommodate his library. The Temple of the Gods pragmatically, poetically transformed into the Temple of Learning. The pavilions are orchestrated in a schema to facilitate the architectural lectures. In a world without photography, when travel was difficult, even for the privileged, the campus in the wilderness provided physical, real-life illustrations 10 pavilions of brick and stone and timber and light and space for the students' edification. The faces of Pavilion 1 and 2 and 4 are modeled after antique temples with porticos pronaos. In Pavilion 1 on the west, the classical order is Doric from the Baths of Diocletian from Freyard de Chambray's treatise. The pilaster linking the covered colonnade of the dormitories to the portico sits behind the monumental order, a compositional lesson on joining elements. The interiors of most pavilions are a simple central hall plan with classrooms on the ground floor and domestic quarters for the professor above. Pavilion 2 is the Ionic. Nope, sorry, didn't go back. Pavilion 2 is the Ionic, the order from the Temple of Fortuna Virilis. And Pavilion 4 is Doric again of Albano. These three pavilions represent the antique models. The front of Pavilion 3 has an articulated portico and a central block. The Corinthian order is drawn from the 4 books of Palladio, his Renaissance master, and this configuration of central block and portico is a volumetric scheme both used commonly in villas. Pavilion 5 and 6 contrast each other across the lawn and demonstrate further compositional variations for fronts. 5 has a flat roof, uncommon in those times, and a monumental Ionic screen drawn from Palladio's 4 books. 6, an A-styler, that is without columns, but composition, but proportion in the manner of the Ionic from the theater of Marcellus. 2 Ionics, one with, the other without columns. These compositions are common to 16th and 17th century architecture. Baroque, it should be noted, is absent in Jefferson's built lexicon. He preferred chaste models of architectures for the New Republic. Pavilion 7 was the first to be built and located on the cornerstone laid in 1817. It is composed of an arcaded base with a piano nobile of Doric drawn above, taken from Palladio. The arcaded ground floor continues the line of the colonnade, producing a break in the rhythm where the column is substituted by the arch. It served as a specimen of Neo-Palladian taste, the prevailing taste in the colony at the time. Pavilions 8, 9, and 10 are neoclassical fronts, presenting different ways of engaging colonnades and adapting orders from antique sources, hallmarks of neoclassicism. Pavilion 8 presents a monumental Doric order in antis with a recessed portico behind the columnar screen, the first to demonstrate this manner of connection. The order, Corinthian, from the Baths of Diocletian. Pavilion 9, fashioned after Ledoux's Hotel for Madame Guimard, the famous dancer, which Jefferson visited while in France, is a relatively current work by a master whose works are associated with the French Revolution and the advent of modernism. The portico is a concave apsidal recess with 2 Ionic columns from the Temple of Fortuna Virilis in Antis. A filtered light illuminates the recess hemicycle. Pavilion 10, which has been restored to the original in the last decade, developed from a sketch of William Thornton, has a flat roof behind a tall parapet detailed as an attic frieze. The columns, Doric from the theater of Marcellus, are baseless and support a pedimented portico articulated forward. Stuart and Rivette's famous book, The Antiquities of Athens, 1748, was in Jefferson's libraries and included illustrations of the then inaccessible monuments of Greece with baseless Dorics. Teofilo used this order in the design of the Addison Meisner Award Medal for the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. The east and west ranges, low to the earth, anchor the epic composition to the base of the hill. Their character is of another modality, the vernacular. At the summit, that was a view of the arch. At the summit, the rotunda presides over rows of colonnades and pavilions. Together, all a chorus of lessons on typology, composition, history, the orders, invention, the classical, the vernacular, all built instruction. Jefferson built a book, Jefferson's Treatise on Architecture. That's the reading, the new reading. Jefferson's third testimonial, father of the University of Virginia, on the face of the obelisk, was also a text in the end, erudite by different means. It seems that Jefferson, the sage of Monticello, and our dear Professor Victoria were, as Scully's letter states, at home in literature as in architecture or the history of art. This letter that I read previously, given by Scully to Teo, was last week lent to me by Maria. I will reread only the last thought of Scully's with a sentence I purposely edited out at first reading. I have always been impressed by Mr. Victoria. I love his wit, his wonderful comic gift, the sense of wonder that so clearly fills him. I hope this letter serves the university and hope it will entrust him with a professorship. It was his tenure recommendation. One thing we talked about, it seems that Jefferson, the sage of Monticello, and our dear Professor Victoria were, as Scully's letter earlier states, as at home in all of those fields. But there was one thing we talked about, the three, Victoria, Scully, and I, while working on the book Between Two Towers. That unanimous singularity of that which advances the human condition, indefinitely, buildings and books. Thank you very much.
My name is Roberto Bejar, and I'm a professor here at the School of Architecture and work with my partner Rosario Marquardt. Rosario Marquardt and I arrived in Miami the old-fashioned way, driving from New York City in May 1983. Our arrival was quite memorable as we entered Miami Beach via Julia Tuttle Causeway and were greeted by Christos and Jean-Claude's surrounded islands. It was an incredible welcome to the city. Soon after, I met Teofilo Victoria, or Pacho, as we knew him then, during an architectural review at the School of Architecture. It is always a mystery, and I think Rosario's portrait of Teofilo tells that story as we were talking with Maria last week. It is always a mystery how we become who we are. Childhood, place, and family undoubtedly play important roles in this process. But then there is chance and life, events that forge a kind of garden of forking paths. In retrospect, these two fateful encounters shaped our journey and marked our arrival in the city that would become our home. Teofilo and I were about 30 years old when we met. We had recently completed our graduate studies at Columbia University and the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies in New York City. Miami was still a very young city, not yet 90 years old. Miami Beach was not South Beach. Miami Vice was the must-see TV show, and the city was presented to the world as the land of cocaine cowboys, and by Time magazine as America's Casablanca. Teofilo was returning to Miami, where his Colombian family had settled, while Rosario and I were searching for a place to begin a new life after leaving Argentina behind. Teofilo and I share common but distinct Latin American cultures, shaped by cities like Cartagena, Providence, Rome, Buenos Aires, and Rio de Janeiro. We also share the extraordinary culture and architectural experience of New York City, and a passion for architecture and cities. Perhaps most importantly, both of us found ourselves at a pivotal crossroads in the life of architects. Having completed formal disciplinary education, we felt the need to define our architectural preferences and interests, to discover and develop our own voices as architects. This was the context in which we developed an intense friendship centered on architecture. The locus of this friendship was the School of Architecture, where we share an office and spend day and night in a continuous shared learning session, interrupted only by lunch at Nena's, in fact, with many of you, several of you present here tonight, a nearby Cuban cafeteria, and endless, and I mean endless, nighttime drives through the city in Teofilo's light blue Volkswagen, fueled, of course, by Cuban coffees at Versailles. We were fortunate, I think, to have complementary architectural educations. Teofilo's year in Rome as a student with the Rhode Island School of Design, and my year at the Institute in New York brought together the lessons of antiquity and contemporary practices. Our conversations traveled from Athens to Rome and from New York City to Miami in an endless stream of images across time and space. These included temples, palazzi, Italian villas, townhouses, skyscrapers, and much more. Images and lessons that guided us in rediscovering architectural memory and the architecture of the city as fundamental sources of inspiration. Macondo, Havana, or the mythical foundation of Buenos Aires as described by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Alejo Carpentier, and Jorge Luis Borges, film classics like Naked City, Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire, or Fellini's and Pasolini's Visions of Rome, together with Italian squares and urban landscapes painted by the Chirico and pre-Renaissance painters, all, and I mean all, coexisted in a montage of architectural emotions that propel our understanding of architecture as a cultural endeavor. Architectural books complemented and expanded this experience. Teofilo and I would study architects and projects page by page, analyzing plans and elevations, and uncovering correspondences and analogies. We were excited to expand our architectural literacy through history and space. Somehow, I think, we felt as though we were rediscovering architecture while simultaneously realizing that we were part of an idea of architecture much larger, much larger than ourselves. Our all-encompassing practice was built upon friendship and architecture as one. Between 1985 and 1991, we developed an informal partnership that included 4 competition projects, a symposium in New York City, and shared visiting professorships at Cornell and Harvard University. We were successful in all the competitions, winning honorable mentions and first prizes, but one was indeed the most important, Veneciano Anónimo. Maria de la Guardia, Teofilo's lifelong partner, as you all know, has referred to this project as the seed of many things that came afterward. In talking with Rosario about it, I have come to realize the profound truth of Maria's statement. Teofilo and I, with the collaboration of 3 fantastic students, Adri Markov, Jesus Amado, Roberto Rosa, and Rosario Marquardt, created the project for the Venice Biennial in 1995, directed by Aldo Rossi, Veneciano Anónimo. Veneciano Anónimo is a kind of compendium, a kind of atlas, if you wish, of our most important discoveries and aspirations at the time. It involves a kind of architectural practice that, while speculative in nature, invites us to engage reality with a sense of wonder and possibilities. The project reconsiders Canaleto's Capriccio of the Rialto as an architectural drawing to be built. we aim to underline the role of drawing in architecture as a vehicle for architectural knowledge, discovery, and action. Within the Capriccio, we incorporated the project, a Venetian column with a golden winged lion on top, celebrating the foundational mythical site of the city. It was not an easy drawing, perhaps only possible because of the unconscious courage of youth and 2 months of nonstop hand drawing, but by 5 people. I remember Teofilo and I standing late at night in front of the drawing, Lucky Strike and Marlboro Red at hand, unable to believe that what we had done. Sometime later, we received a letter signed by Aldo Rossi inviting us to present the project at the biennial. It was our first exhibition ever, first exhibition and publication ever, a kind of new form of happiness, if you wish. The project gave us the confidence that everything was possible. And in the process, we discovered Venice and Miami as sister cities, places of encounter where the world came together, then and now. Teofilo and I imagined a new way of making architecture with memory and imagination. Later in our careers, Teofilo and Maria explore the inaugural moment, while Rosario and I focus on the marvel of the real. Perhaps these two fundamental themes are at the origin of Veneziano Anonimo. Thank you.
Okay, my name is, I am Charlotte von Moos. I'm a Swiss architect and founding director of the practice South von Moos. And since 2019, I have been an assistant professor here at the school and a colleague of Teofilo's. Nostalgias and analogies. It is indeed very humbling, if not intimidating, to speak in this lineup of Teofilo Victoria's colleagues and friends who have known him so much longer than I have. I met him in early 2019 when I started my research in Miami in the 1980s, which was published in 2022. What triggered this research was a vague curiosity about the destruction of Arquitectonica's first building, the Babylon, which I visited and documented together with the photographer Max Creasy shortly before its demolition in 2019. The story of this apartment block was published in my piece, Bye Bye Babylon. I was curious to understand why there was such a lack of care for this early project of Arquitectonica's, while, for example, one of the early projects of Herzog und Dömeron, my teachers and mentors back in Switzerland, the apartment building along a party wall, completed in Basel in 1989, and where Jacques Herzog still lives, together with his family and other tenants, were kept up so carefully. Thanks to Vincent Scully's book, Between Two Towers, I soon discovered the project Casif by De La Guardia Victoria, which, completed in 1992, sadly suffered the same fate as the Babylon. Victoria's lecture in my seminar, as well as a generous interview at the Coral Gables Books and Books Cafe, were fundamental in my being able to write the article, Forever in Paintings. The fact that Casif has been demolished amplifies in a magical way the importance of the singular documents that survive it. A series of paintings and drawings of sometimes fantastically surreal quality that illustrate in a particular way the strong relationship between the architecture and art of the time. Also, just like the apartment building along a party wall in Basel, these drawings are a testament to our profession's late days of analog drawing. Be it in construction drawings or in the primordial verve of conceptual pastel sketching. Another aspect that Victoria and Herzog and de Meuron have in common is a unique entanglement with the Italian architect Aldo Rossi. Herzog and de Meuron were students of Aldo Rossi at the ETH in the 1970s, where he had an unprecedented impact on a generation of students, drawing attention to the larger context and interweaving architectural, urbanistic, historical, and theoretical discussions. His presence as an inspiring teacher made him a role model for many and established his legendary reputation. The influence of his work on the young Herzog and de Meuron is evident, as for example, in their thesis project with Dolf Schnebly, on the right of this slide. Or in their first house, the 1979 Blue House in Basel, visibly inspired by Rossi's studies of the Cabine dell'Elba. Thanks to the cross-Atlantic efforts of Victoria and Behar and their colleagues, as we just heard, in the late 80s, and just shortly before being awarded the Pritzker Prize in 1990, 1 year after Frank Gehry, Aldo Rossi was invited to design a project for the extension of our school, with the aim to design a true focus for the university's public life and activities. Aldo Rossi's ambition was no less than to design, as he called it, a small city for the School of Architecture at University of Miami. This small city consisted of the following distinctive elements: the Ziff Tower, the monument connected to the mirror surface of the lake, first placed on Lake Osceola, later along its shore, a sort of acropolis of architectural studies with the auditorium and studio spaces placed on a plinth containing the parking garage, and thirdly, the avenue lined with twin rows of palm trees connecting the monuments. The existing buildings were redesigned and enriched with new architectural features that make them better suited to Miami's prevailing climate. Extensive balconies, porticos, and the new stair towers to accentuate the existing stairwells. What I found most surprising when researching Aldo Rossi's project, about which offices Kersten Gehr wrote his piece, Looking for America, was that this project was more than just a sketch so prominently displayed in our school's meeting room. Indeed, the project went well into design development. It was developed in a series of plans, models, perspectives, and even 3D models. The proposed tower is an homage to the Teatro del Mondo, the floating icon Rossi created for the first architecture biennial in 1980. Ephemeral and archetypal, the Teatro del Mondo catalyzed structural themes of the Italian theoretical debate of the following years, but also the timelessness of forms and, as the exhibition would title, the presence of the past. To quote the Pritzker address on Aldo Rossi in 1990, Rossi has been able to follow the lessons of classical architecture without copying them. His buildings carry echoes from the past in their use of forms that have a universal, haunting quality. Here's an axonometric drawing of the street and the monument, as he would call it, showing the proposed balconies and loggias along the courtyard, which would have offered a fantastic space for social interaction. And here a view of the beautifully crafted model of the Ziff Tower and a sample of the carefully drawn detailed plans with their concise wording. The tower proposed a vertical stack of public spaces: the cortile, the piano nobile, the cube, the sphere, the cone, the belvedere, where, to quote Rossi, receptions and gatherings can be held from the vantage point of a tropical panorama. Here another view of the Ziff Tower, seen with the brutalist 1960s Hecht towers, now gone. The beautiful wooden models with a furniture-like quality. On the right side, the Herzog de Meuron model photographed by the photographer Thomas Ruff. Or this document, a somewhat crude 3D rendering of the project, an amusing testament to the early days of our discipline's digitization. Concurrently, in the late 80s, when working on the spiral stair of the Vitra Design Museum in Weil am Rhein, Frank Gehry and his team realized that the analog working methods were too constricted for his formal explorations. And this spurred him to make crucial developments in computer-aided design, which are now commonplace in any architecture school or office. As project manager of Herzog Dömer's Vitra House, I had learned about Gehry's Vitra stair problem. While the Vitra House and its stairs was developed both with analog and digital tools, it is perfectly clear this stack of domestic houses would never have existed without Aldo Rossi's insistence on the idea of the archetype of the house. The Vitra campus, a small city itself, with its collection of projects by important architects, has become a model for many other developments, including Craig Robin's Miami Design District. In the ETH Contemporary City Institute, founded in 1999 by Roger Diener, Jacques Herzog, Marcel Meili, Pierre Dömeron, and the sociologist Christian Schmid, sketching was constantly employed to trace urbanization processes that had shaped cities and to identify emerging potentials. As students at ETH Studio Basel, we were explicitly asked not to design. Or when reflecting on the urban study Basel, a Nation City, developed together with the artist Remy Zaug, to quote, "We have approached the urban agglomerate of Basel like strangers, observing and wondering, not considering the building laws and zoning plans. We were interested in the physical reality of the city, which is the starting point of our thoughts and projections." This brings me back to Aldo Rossi's proposal for the extension of the USOA. As a stranger, almost, some of the most interesting interventions he proposed in an acupuncture-like strategy were the interactions and extensions of the existing buildings and spaces by Marion Manley. While we all know that Rossi's project was not realized, I do hope we can honor the legacy of the cross-Atlantic ambition and spirit it holds. When discussing future projects for the USOA or the greater UM campus, we can be advocates for great architecture with the highest aspirations, just as Teofilo and his colleagues did. Whether realized or not, every project is an opportunity for exchange and connection beyond Miami, beyond the US. It may be time for another Pritzker Prize laureate, like the French duo Lacaton-Vassal, whose award-winning Grand Parc housing in Bordeaux is, as it happens, a project of balcony extensions as well, or the Japanese Sana with her Swiss cheese Rolex Center to help us project the future of our campus. Thank you, Teofilo, not only for helping me better understand Miami, but also for teaching me valuable lessons about my own teachers, and for reminding us all to keep wondering.
Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Lopez. It's a privilege to be here contributing to this event, and thank you all for having me. I met Teofilo as a student. I got to learn about buildings and cities from him. I got to travel and see them firsthand. I had the opportunity to work with him and Maria for years. Got to see him in action both academically and professionally, as a colleague and as a friend. I'm now principal at R.J. Heisenbutler Architects. We specialize in the preservation of historic buildings in Miami and around the state of Florida. I've been part of the faculty here for over 20 years, just part-time, teaching design studios, participating in study abroad programs, and also teaching preservation courses, some of which I'd like to share with you. The building is the classroom. Even though Professor Teofilo Victoria's introductory architecture theory course was held in an anonymous, windowless hall at the back of the campus, his unique teaching style, marked by his quirky, tall, skinny, and serifed font on the chalkboard and flashing lights, captured the attention of otherwise easily distracted freshmen. He introduced us to Vitruvius's ancient treatise on city building in a way that seemed like essential contemporary reading, and he illuminated the relationship between people and places, and the balance of theory and practice, past and future. Of course, there was the wonderful Open City Studio, the traveling design studio that exposed students to distant cultures and building traditions. My first experience in such a studio was in Athens. We set up a drafting studio above a Greek taverna for the summer, embracing the local rhythm and culture. The class visited the city's most significant cultural sites and museums, conducting research locally in preparation for a local design project. The end result of that research effort was a carefully composed and executed documentation drawing, where I collaborated with Elizabeth Cardona to produce measured drawings of the Erection, one of the most exquisite and influential buildings in Western civilization. We had the privilege, which has been unavailable to the public for a quarter century by now. We got to hike up the Acropolis Hill every morning with our drawing boards in tow, and we would stretch our measuring tapes across the marble surfaces of that 2,500-year-old masterpiece. Then we would record its measurements, climb back down the hill to find the closest gyro, and get to work on our documentation drawings back at the studio. There was another summer class with Teofilo called the Historic American Building Survey, or HABS for short. Down at Lummis Park on the Miami River, we spent one late summer documenting the oldest house in the city. Every detail, every framing member, every floorboard, down to 1/8 of an inch. It was a grueling but eye-opening experience because we walked away from it knowing it inside and out, understanding its composition from the ground to the sky. To observing, measuring, and drawing. HABS is the nation's first federal preservation program, and it utilizes documentation as a means of recording America's diverse building culture. In the 1930s, the federal government, through a collaboration between the National Park Service, the Library of Congress, and the AIA, sought to respond to the widespread loss of pre-Civil War American buildings by producing drawings, photographs, and written reports of America's buildings into a collection to be housed at the Library of Congress. Today, the collection has been complemented by the Historic American Engineering Record and the Historic American Landscape Survey, providing an unparalleled resource for research into America's natural and built environment. Every building provides some insight to its inhabitants and their stories. Over the years, the UM School of Architecture has continued to offer this advanced drawing course, which actually is now part of the curriculum for the new Masters in Preservation program. Over the last 15 years, we've had many student teams be recognized with numerous national Peterson Prizes for their excellent documentations, including some of the following subjects. Jesu Catholic Church in downtown Miami. It's a 1920s steel truss, Mediterranean-inspired, single-volume building set atop a semi-exposed basement with a wide-open, columnless interior, multiple marble altars, and statuaries set against rich wall tapestries and imported stained glass windows. The current building replaced an original wood church that was built on land donated by Henry Flagler, and it survives along with a rectory. However, the 5-story school in the background down the street to the left, that 5-story school, unfortunately was demolished years ago as a result of the urban flight to Miami's ever-expanding suburbs. Around the corner, the Shoreland Arcade, another 1920s building, was built by the Shoreland by the Shoreland Company. They were responsible for the construction of the Venetian Islands and the North Miami suburb of Miami Shores, another garden city and contemporary of Coral Gables. That Gothic tower in the rendering was going to be the headquarters for the Shoreland for the Shoreland Company, but only the first phase was built. It contains a floor plate of approximately 30,000 square feet with facades and entrances on 3 sides of the city block, utilizing neoclassical and Art Deco motifs. The arcades that remain, interestingly, still connect at the Grand Hall in the center of the block. And thankfully, there's an interest in preserving this pedestrian grain in downtown. And our office is currently working on the restoration of the Flagler Street facade, utilizing the same Habs drawings produced by our students over 10 years ago. As a purpose-built architect's office, the George Fink Studio, located in downtown Coral Gables, would have been a showcase for architectural features available to those investing in residential properties in the nascent Garden City. Situated between the colonnade, where Merrick's real estate transactions were closed, and the arts and crafts section where building elements were being fabricated, George Fink would have had his clients' undivided attention as he and his team would design numerous miniature Spanish castles around the city. These Habs drawings would go on to serve as a base drawings for the beautiful renovation and adaptive reuse of the building by Martinez Alvarez Architects just a few years ago for the city of Coral Gables. During the development of the city of Coral Gables, George Merrick's team not only produced and built the iconic Biltmore Hotel for lodging and entertainment of a new community, but also provided a house of worship across the street. The Coral Gables Congregational Church, which just celebrated its centennial, has served as an anchor for the community from Sunday morning services to evening community gatherings and musical performances to this day. The preservation of its architectural character and building elements has been an ongoing labor of love for decades. Some of these images you're seeing are representative of the integration of newer methods of documentation. Our friends at the Institute for Data Science and Computing have shared their expertise with us to produce point clouds from laser scans and photogrammetry like the image you see here on the right, using drone-mounted cameras and a special processing software that yields flat, measurable images that help us produce drawings. Set atop a man-made mound at the south end of the Grand Gardens at Villa Vizcaya, the casino, or Little House, was intended to serve as a screen to filter the intense sunlight reflecting off of the lagoon into the south loggia of the main villa. The casino's central loggia is flanked by 2 rooms and a Baroque set of stairs that wind around the building, delivering guests to the fondamenta on the waterside. Upon arrival to the terrace, the building's thinness is revealed, an architectural folly at the garden's edge, carved in local limestone. It serves as the termination of the axis through the garden, which provided the homeowner with a retreat from the social demands of the main villa. It even has a spiral stair tucked away in the interior wood paneling to access a lovely roof terrace away from all his guests, or most of the guests. Once inside the loggia, the visitor's journey is nearly complete. Enveloped in natural stone, cast stone, tinted stucco, and ironwork, with rich marbles underfoot and heavenly mural above, one stands at a balcony overlooking the wilderness. And yet, the folly is a machine for pleasure, with rich interiors meant for ongoing entertainment and diversion, and accommodating service spaces below in the mound. The architecture melts into the landscape, revealing both floral motifs and human faces in the stone grotto. It stands as a threshold between the man-made, manicured garden and the water with untamed, overgrown mangroves and wildlife. These drawings are filed in the Library of Congress today and list our students as authors, delineators. For them, it's a special opportunity to be part of this ever-growing archive in our national repository of knowledge. And the experience they gain in observing, measuring, drawing, composing, and coordinating a set of drawings gives them practical skills for when they enter the profession. I've heard it again and again from students who have found employment at some of the best architecture offices around the country, that their recruiters have highlighted the value of the HAB's drawings in their portfolio to help them stand out from other talented applicants. Learning by drawing. As Frascati writes, one has to reverse engineer the building to be able to describe it in a series of drawings, much like the drawings that may have been used to build it. One who knows by drawing approaches those who knew by building. For a delineator of a historic building, the experience of coming into direct contact with a column base or a door surround or a stair railing allows one to enter into a shared knowledge, a shared consciousness with the architects and builders they've never met. Those who may have quarried the mountainside or felled the tree or carved a figure or stacked a stone or fastened the rafters or applied the plaster or held the brush to paint with a stencil are no longer invisible in the void of history. Instead, they are present and their craft is alive because their work is known. The measured drawing is a connective tissue that binds a living cultural patrimony, past and future. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Finch. I'm the Florida Chapter Director of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. I am also an alumnus of the University of Miami Master of Architecture program. I've had the good fortune to have Teofilo Victoria not just as my professor, but also as my boss, mentor, and dear friend. I will speak briefly about the pivotal relationship between Teofilo Victoria and the chapter to which he dedicated a tremendous amount of time. We are a nonprofit membership organization founded in 2002 in New York City with 15 chapters across the United States. Our mission is to advance the appreciation and practice of the principles of traditional architecture and its allied arts by engaging educators, professionals, students, and enthusiasts. Classical architecture encompasses an array of skills, traditions, and professions, which include architects, city planners, landscape and interior designers, builders, craftsmen, and many more. Our membership represents countless facets of the thriving field of classical design and is reflected in the ICAA's programs and initiatives. In 2009, Teofilo joined the ICAA Florida Chapter Board after Elizabeth Platter-Zybert recommended him to our then president, David Cave. Teofilo understood that his involvement in the ICAA was an important opportunity to build a bridge to connect classical architecture to students and practitioners through common learning opportunities and exchange. Teofilo was able to guide and accomplish many initiatives and programs during his tenure on the board and as chapter president. Teofilo's love of history and city making influenced his creation of a variety of educational programming opportunities he envisioned could be delivered by our organization. The following examples demonstrate Teofilo's vision for the ICAA and fueled the success and growth of our chapter. Teofilo's first project was to create and structure the chapter's awards program. The first annual Addison Meisner Awards was held in 2012 to recognize excellence in members' work. This April, we will be celebrating our 13th annual Addison Meisner Awards. This year is our biggest AMA to date. We received nearly 80 submissions and have recognized over 160 projects and their talented recipients over the last 12 years. David Case will give us the background story as to how the Addison Meisner Awards came together. It's a great story. Publications and manuals were another area that interested Teofilo. He believed the chapter could produce these types of important resources, providing an enduring contribution of Florida's history. He worked with the University of Miami School of Architecture, the City of Coral Gables, and the Coral Gables Museum on a manual composed of student-drawn, field-measured drawings that documents historical examples of Mediterranean architecture right here in our city. He saw this manual as a continuation of a long-standing tradition of building manuals throughout history that are a key resource used by builders, laypeople, craftspeople, and artisans. Community education was another favorite endeavor for Teofilo. He created and organized a series of 6 lectures produced by the chapter on Mediterranean architecture with broad participation by city residents, officials, and practitioners. This was a partnership with Coral Gables Museum and the School of Architecture. The lectures covered a spectrum of topics to broaden the understanding of Mediterranean architecture, encompassing discussions on the significance and purpose of manuals, historical examples, in-the-field documentation, current professional practice, preservation, and urban planning for today's growth. Youth education was another endeavor Teofilo pursued with the chapter. The ICA's New Heights initiative for high school students was implemented at Gulliver Prep to expand the students' understanding of the built environment, classical architecture, and history. He enjoyed engaging the younger generation. His lectures were filled with knowledge, passion, and humor. His guidance and encouragement helped promote classical architecture and inspire young minds. The enthusiasm of these young design students exposed to their first classical training will most certainly be enduring and impactful as they progress through their education. To honor Teofilo's contributions to our ICAA Florida chapter and community, we have named a lecture series in his memory that will continue to highlight city making. We are pleased to announce and invite you to our first annual Teofilo Victoria lecture series on the City Beautiful movement, February 26th at the Coral Gables Museum. We hope you can join us for 3 lectures running through April and kicking off our 13th annual Addison Meisner Awards weekend at the Biltmore Hotel on April 26th. In closing, our ICAA Florida chapter continues to be inspired and influenced by Teofilo, his contributions, vision, and legacy. We are grateful for his leadership and service to the ICAA and will carry on his good work as we fulfill our mission for our members, community, and students throughout Florida. It is my pleasure to introduce David Case, past president and current board member of the ICAA Florida chapter. Thank you.
Afternoon. David is also a UM grad, B Arch 79, and dear friend. And a cold. The Florida chapter of the ICA was founded in 2006. In 2009, the national organization asked Cliff and me to revitalize the chapter. We thought it was essential to engage and collaborate with the University of Miami School of Architecture, which was the only school of architecture in Florida offering coursework in classical and traditional architecture and urbanism. As an alumnus of the school, I reached out to then Dean Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk, who years early recommended my association with the ICAA. Without hesitation, Elizabeth suggested Teofilo as a faculty member to our growing chapter board. So began his 15-year association with the chapter. In our board meetings, Teofilo would often say, "We should do this." One of those "we should do this" ideas initiated an awards program to recognize outstanding classical and traditional designs by practitioners in Florida. With the board's blessing, he formed a committee. The committee and the board named this new awards program after Addison Meisner as the most recognizable architect related to traditional Florida architecture. Teofilo structured the awards parameters. The jury had to be of the highest quality to provide credence and prestige. He thought the jury should be comprised of 3 individuals, both academics and practitioners. Submissions were to be blind, and projects had to be completed within the last 10 years. A list of the required drawings and images were established. Teofilo created a list of award categories. He also felt it was important to provide the recognition in a means other than a typical certificate. "We should do a medal," he said, and we agreed. Teofilo designed a hand-cast bronze medal and chose a Greek Doric order capital representative of strength contained in a circle on one side of the medal and a plan drawing of the column channels acting as a decorative circular border containing the engraved details of the recipient and the award category. Teofilo selected our first jury, comprised of Elizabeth Dowling, Professor Emeritus of Architecture at Georgia Tech, our own Richard John, School of Architecture, then editor of The Classicist, and Michael Lykoudis, Dean of Notre Dame School of Architecture. The selection of jurors has expanded to include interior designers and landscape architects. Award categories have been expanded also. The first award ceremony was conducted at the Colony Hotel in Palm Beach and added cachet to the event. On October 20th, 2012, with Teofilo as the chairman of the awards committee and myself as president, we presented 10 awards that night. 12 years on, the awards program under Teofilo's tutelage and high standards has grown phenomenally and will be held this 13th year at the Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables on April 26th. The Addison Meisner Medal Awards will continue to be his testament and living legacy within the ICAA community. Teofilo's dedication to classical architecture is exemplified in his extraordinary academic visits to the Veneto to visit Andrea Palladio's seminal works. For years, Teofilo brought a group of students to Venice and the Veneto to study the work of Palladio during the fall-spring intersession. After joining the ICAA Florida board, collaboration with the ICAA became a natural fit. As such, the chapter began offering the Palladio Journey Tours in conjunction with the university. Imagine my excitement when the opportunity to travel with Teofilo to study Palladio in the Veneto became available in 2014. My travels with Teofilo, accompanied by Adib Khoury, began in Milan. Upon arriving in Venice, we were joined by Joe Cronk and the group of 14 met and walked to the Piazza San Marco with journals or sketchbooks in hand. Teofilo thought a travel journal was an important role for the student of architecture. It allowed the architect to document and illustrate buildings visited as a useful reference or model in practice. The travel journal also served as an exercise in freehand drawing or sketching. A review of the day's sketching was an integral part of the requirements. Teofilo discussed the history of Venice, how it was formed, the typology of the palazzo, etc. We traveled on to Padua. We walked to the Cornaro Loggia and Odeon by Falconetto. Teofilo wanted us to see what Palladio was exposed to while growing up in Padua. We took the train to Vicenza. In Vicenza, we visited the Villa Capra known as La Rotunda. We walked to the Basilica, multiple palazzos, and finally the Teatro Olimpico. When walking with a group with Teofilo, if you ever got separated or lagged behind, all you had to do was follow the fedora. We drove to Bassano del Grappa and walked across Palladio's bridge, across the Brenta. In Verona, we toured the Castel Vecchio Museum by Scarpa, Julia's Balcony, and the Roman Amphitheater. I continue to be amazed by Teofilo's wealth of knowledge, his ability to discuss history, the socioeconomic factors, the cause and effects that led to the creation of Venice and the Veneto and its architecture. Teofilo was equally versed in art and architecture and the culture that enveloped us. I feel he was instinctively telling us to observe and enjoy the good things that life has to offer. I consider him to be a true Renaissance man. Upon my return, I recommended Teofilo for the Addison Meissner Medal for pedagogy, and it was unanimously approved by the board. The 2 weeks traveling with Teofilo was the highlight of my architectural education. It further reinforced the importance of travel and study abroad as a key component to an architectural education. By the end of our journey, it seems we saw almost every Palladian villa with the exception of La Malcontenta. I cherish these memories. I can say that it has affected me as a seasoned professional. I often think of the impact and influence he had on students during his tenure at Teofilo went on became our 4th chapter president, and Teofilo is still regarded by many within the ICAA as the soul of our Florida chapter. Thank you.
On behalf of my brother Luis and myself, it is an honor to be in this Festschrift for Teofilo Victoria, among all you glorious and wonderful people. Maria, Teo, Tacio, Eugenio, Americo, Dean, Hania, Marco, Mateo, Paco, and your whole family. My partners, Luis, Mari, Giorgio, Dean El Curry, my colleagues of the University of Miami School of Architecture, students of architecture, lovers of architecture, my family and my friends. Ralph, Jorge Reyes, architect. As a form of introduction, all this account is the same as my older brother Luis, who will present the 4 competitions we collaborated with the great architect and Professor Teofilo Victoria. We were born in Cuba in the late 1950s, right before, you know the story. Along with my younger sister, Anna, now a renowned artist in Miami. We grew up in the suburban edge of Miami, adjacent to the Everglades. As the city grew around us, we learned the vernacular construction from my father, a renowned civil engineer and developer builder. We studied architecture at 3 universities: Miami-Dade Community College, University of Miami, Bachelor of Architecture, and Cornell University, Master of Architecture. Luis and I started our firm with my wife, Maritere Camarrocas, in 1986, and have been principals in practice for Tres Camarrocas Architects in Miami for almost 40 years. Now enjoying our new generation of associates, our son Jorge Gabriel and Aliette in fashion and interior design. Jorge is a student of Teofilo's as well. The practice is dedicated to a philosophy of architecture that aspires to the construction of beauty and permanence without time. Also dedicated to the composition and meaning of buildings in the city. This aspect of our interest stems from our early education and understanding of the modern and ancient cities through our studies with Colin Rowe at Cornell University, as well as the Urban Design School of Miami, centered around Andres Duani and Liz Platter-Zieber and the Seaside event. I meet Teofilo through a series of ephemeral encounters linked to the first Seaside charrette, sometimes in a car with Luis taking or picking up at Miami International Airport. I was excited to hear about the plans, progress, and meticulous detailing. Although mostly from anecdotal stories from Luis, I began to feel Teofilo's architectural spirit. In the late 1980s, our common architectural affinities, Tiger Tail, Kazif, Inkline drawings, the figure ground, construction, and the city motivate a dedicated professional and collegial relationship and friendship that started then and lasted throughout his life. We began to know him and Maria then while collaborating on various projects, many all the way through construction with great success. Floridia, Azul, Banana Group Towers, Euclid, Computer Express, Cliff Hammock Gatehouse, and El Monumento a los Hermanos al Rescate. All collaborating experience with Teofilo were like wonderful journeys with magical results, usually beginning with an elegant urban experience of a coffee shop with a profound and inspiring description of projects on napkins and paper placemats. Then in car rides, we would study and imagine the city within its fantastic liberal grid, along with topics and discussions that were always enlightening and opened a new way to see architecture and the city. I can remember some of them. The power and consequence of original and recognizable and beautiful form in architecture and the city. Architecture relies on a precise methodology with an understanding of all things: mathematics, arts, music, science, nature, and culture. The search for truth in all matters of architectural expression. The application of artistic, humanistic, cultural, scientific, the history of all things, and civic knowledge to architecture. Love and know classical architecture. Be masterful and artistic in matters of architectural drawings and models. Love and knowledge of construction systems, ancient and modern. Being mindful and kind with the patronage of the architectural project, no matter what. Our collaborations with Teofilo developed further as professors alongside him in the Open City Studio and Palladio Journey, and several shared design studios at the University of Miami School of Architecture, applying his same magic and soul to teaching, always with the student as his primary love. On long walks in the alley of banyan trees in the Garden City, in front of his beautiful stone house, we would arrive and reach all conclusions of all matters in the presence of the great Biltmore Tower, the skyscraper in the garden. The meticulous decisions and discussions in selection of cities, subjects, and projects, the lesson order and schedules and costs and field trips, presentations, collaborations, and reviews, a precise syllabus and philosophy, and a beautiful and profound teaching method in description, prose, and always a real dramatic sight. Our first experience with him as a professor was in The Eternal Return, a symposium he directed from the School of Architecture held in Columbia University in the late 1990s. He invited us to show our early built work in the great Avery Hall of Lectures. Our teaching collaborations with Teofilo in the Open City Studio take us around the world of cities, joining with the individuals which, like a natural family, and along the years, give their beautiful teaching to the Open City Studio. The list of professors: John Stephan, George Hernandez, Frank Martinez, Douglas Duani, Rocco Cheo, Gregory Saldana, Carrie Panabon, Adib Kure, Steve Fett, George Stoltz, Rick Lopez, Christina Miller, Jess Lynn, Ann Finch, Rafael Fornés, Nicolás Delgado, Rogelio Cadena, Dr. G.I. Wang, and a number of local architects and professors along the way. The list of cities, although seemingly distinctive, are joined like chapters in the story of architecture and urbanism today in modern times. New London, Mérida, Antigua, Cartagena, San Juan, Port Antonio, Athens, Sevilla, Rome, Lisbon, Bangkok, Shanghai, Tokyo, St. Petersburg, Kyoto, Beijing, Peking, Stockholm, Tokyo, Tokyo 2, Tokyo 3, and Tokyo Blue 2. In these 30+ years of the Open City Studio and around a dozen Palladio journeys, Teofilo formulates a unique and new teaching system relevant to several pertinent and critical subjects of architecture today: classical architecture design, urban design, preservation, vernacular architecture. These programs inspired the students to innovate, allowing the cultural influence to enter the architect's thinking through the daily experience, vida cotidiana, historical and theoretical readers and discussions, and finally, presented by the students in a masterful drawing that is to be seen, to be believed. Our collaborations with Teofilo, both in teaching and professional practice, and in this, our collaborations with Teofilo, both in teaching and in professional practice, the subject is clear and identifiable. The emphasis is on an overall clear idea that is described thoroughly while sketching and visualizing all of the elements at the same time, continuously. The sketch is the way to see. These are merely a few of Teofilo's sketches made on a counter in a matter of minutes, usually. Some maybe even less than a minute. They're made during their respective projects. This was a sketch for the Monumento a los Hermanos al Rescate, which was a 200-foot monument made in iron that would be floated out of the Miami River and placed on the location of the massacre. Also shown are early sketches of Floridia, Paco Nati's house, as well as Euclid, a great project, one of the many great projects we did with Dean. This was his method of exposing his mind and vision in real time. A most endearing collaboration was Teofilo conferring our master's degrees. It's a little known collaboration, this one. Teofilo becomes the substitute for Colin Rowe on our committee for our final thesis presentation. We worked that out. Liz helped us. He and the others deliberated on our projects. Luis and I presented together, which was also unprecedented, for a final review. And having a shoo-in, they passed us and conferred our degree with a Master of Architecture from Cornell University. The theses are titled Havana and Key West, Baroque Urban Design in the Late 20th Century. Our discussions with Teofilo about Cuba was always ongoing, His direction in the Institute of Classical Art and Architecture Florida chapter expanded the interest and influence with the Oficina del Historiador de la Ciudad de La Habana. Through his grace, commitment, and dedication, he developed this mutually enriching relationship. Consistent with his living, loving character, he leaves us with an optimistic plan. My brother Luis will now present our fondest collaboration with De La Guardia Victoria architects and urbanists. New Williamsburg, New Plainfield, New Amherst, and New London. These titles weren't made by Teofilo. They were the actual titles of the competition. The competitions take place in Tigertail House, the TCA headquarters, and the DLGB office on Minorca. In the evenings, after normal hours of operation, they were produced by a team of students from the School of Architects and young architects, skillfully drawing the beautiful schemes often referred to by Teofilo as quilt parties. They are to depict a new way to see the modern city with a coexistence with nature, understanding why they are and their absolute beauty, and represent a new American mindset for architecture and urban development.
Luis Treyes. On the morning of August 12, 1992, Hurricane Andrew, a monstrous Category 5 hurricane with wind speeds of 165 to 172 miles an hour, made landfall in South Florida, leaving behind a death toll of 65 and 125,000 damaged or destroyed homes. The local economy was devastated by the physical interruption, taking many months to return to a vague resemblance of its prior existence. The initial recovery effort was soon followed by a vigorous economic revival spurred on by the FEMA and insurance dollars aimed at the rebuilding effort. Excuse me. In those 2 to 3 years that followed the storm, Luis and Jorge Treyes, that's the two of us, joined forces with Teofilo Victoria to pursue a lineup of national and international competitions. These collaborations between the young offices of Treyes Cavarrojas Architects and De La Guardia Victoria Architects and Urbanists evolved quite naturally between friends and colleagues teaching at the University of Miami School of Architecture at the time. The teams of participants of these 4 competitions were made up of faculty and students from the school, working with the time afforded us stemming from the interruption by Andrew and our own initiatives as co-founders with Professor Victoria of the Open City Studio and the Palladio Journey courses at the school. Students and recent graduates were invited to participate, and teams were formed in each case as the competitions were announced to the public. The competitions were opportunities for the student-teacher design teams to exercise in principled architecture and urban design theory in office settings away from the school. And so, with great interest in presenting relevant projects, the 3 principals visited the sites in each case and proposed projects derived from the study of relevant patterns in urban design and the local developments of historic architecture. The aim was, and continues to be, a new architecture of urban consequence and cultural significance. These competition entries completed for a new town plan and a courthouse design for New Williamsburg, Virginia, plan book house designs for New Amherst, a new town in Ontario, Canada, New Plainfield, a new town center planned outside of Joliet, Illinois, and a gateway design for New London, Connecticut, demonstrate the application of this will to extend or prolong local building forms, construction techniques, and traditions with the development of new streets and squares, houses, and public buildings for these various places. For each of these projects, the aim was to clearly identify the vernaculars, monuments, and monumental realms of the city, and to develop or extend the new city in relation to them. At times, the proposal is necessarily continuous with colloquial form and the construction techniques, as is the case of the planned book houses designed for the new town of New Amherst outside of Coburg, Ontario, planned by Dwani Plotter Seberg architects and town planners. These house designs were carefully derived from a review of the historic urban and rural examples found throughout those shores of Lake Ontario. The collaboration produced two sets of plan book designs and joined them into a single plan book proposal that would afford nuanced alternatives for the pioneer developers of the new town. Later, under the direction of Professor Victoria, a poster promoting the graduate and postgraduate programs offered at the SOA was created by Stephen Fett, who's here tonight, and Tabitha Hanna, excuse me. We're looking at that image. This view is unmistakably New Amherst, and at the inaugural moment, a snowy landscape, a Canadian capriccio. The new house designs adopt a number of local forms, such as the Central Hall house type, the Georgian house, which appears regionally in countless manifestations, and the rural house type, known as the Ontario cottage, a freestanding one-story Central Hall house type that is to be found in farming homesteads and suburban locations throughout the region. Fee simple townhouses and are also proposed for the new town. Models with and without commercial ground floors are the prevalent house types found in the main streets and squares of the region, and they are proposed here. The drawings are inspired by a local atlas printed in the late 19th century and discovered in a local bookstore during the site visit. They intend to capture the beauty of the inaugural moment, where rural settings are lovingly changed and building sites are thoughtfully embarked on their way to an urban life. And so the life history of the town begins, told in time with each house added. In the proposal for a new courthouse and town plan for New Williamsburg, the project intends to display a sharp contrast between the new forms of the city and those of the historic city, employing familiar formal elements introduced in new materials and at new scales, as is the formal presentation of the Colossus in the garden. In this case, a Williamsburg lantern adorns the top of the stack of porticos of the tower. Here, the contrast revealed, in the celebration of the beautiful union of seemingly divergent characters is inspired by the paintings of Edward Hicks. preacher, painter, and sign maker, working in Pennsylvania and New York in the 1820s. Here we see a painting by Edward Hicks. Eloquent renditions of the ancient ideal for a peaceable kingdom in a new world. This is a heroic world where the lion and the lamb lie together in a new, harmonic, and restful peace. The skyscraper, whose program and formal composition is developed within the great tradition of tower forms for these significant American government buildings, complete with Courthouse Square, is a new American lighthouse. It is proposed as the single spire of the new town center, whose cupola rises above all and lends meaningful profile and urban identity to the triangular green that is the new civic space. The green is open to the College of William and Mary on the east, and the location of the courthouse tower at its center terminates the mile-long Main Street axis. An inn is proposed at the western extent of the street, and a great lawn is proposed along the way. This map, like the Frenchman's map for nearby Williamsburg, proposes that the precious forests and watersheds be preserved by the proprietors of the town in a civic act of responsible consciousness and proud unity. The proposal for new Plainfield, a new town center to be found in the suburbs of Chicago, is rendered by the extensions of pre-existing street and block grids, coupled with the introduction of honorific public open space and ordered in terms of their importance. The street grid, introducing the ubiquitous diagonals, serves as a unifying and continuous mobility fabric onto which the singular civic spaces and public buildings are introduced. The triangular green is proposed as a great central park in which the Civic Hall for Will County, Illinois, is positioned. The design geometries employ the contrasting orthogonality of the street grid and the radial diagonality of the avenues, as we may remember them from Chicago. The green is bound on the south side by a proposed main street, which enters the space from a smaller triangular green on the east side. Townhouses with and without commercial ground floors are proposed at the perimeters of these greens. In the smaller of the spaces, a monument commemorates the receding herds of American buffaloes in the prairie, and the commercial street extends to the west along a state road. The introduction of a school site fronting a smaller green in the manner of nearby Oak Park, a post office square, and a great lawn join the triangular green to complement and animate the otherwise continuous grid. A rail line and a riverbed preserve abut the area on the east. The new green for New London proposal is for a gateway space, as it was requested in the competition program brief and located at the banks of the River Thames in New London. The green is proposed to house a new meeting hall built of reclaimed recycled timber. The space is modeled on greens found in the area where important meeting halls, churches, hallowed grounds, and graveyards are positioned, as is the example of the green in New Haven. Here, the green is fronted by two lines of whalers' houses, and the meeting house is presented to the river at the center. The meeting house, resembling a great witch's hat, is to be constructed of recycled timber, sourced in the region and traditionally built of wood with masonry materials at the roof and the floors. The green abuts the bank of the River Thames, where a rail line passes, connecting the city to points north and south. At Bank Street, two townhouse rows with a commercial shop fronts are proposed at the sidewalk's edge, extending the commercial character of this important street into the center of Dutchtown. An alleyway serves the commercial uses and separates it from the residential uses at mid-block. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Hello, my name is Eric Vogt. I'm a graduate of the School of Architecture, and I'm one of the more ancient students of Teofilo, as well as many others here. It is indeed an honor to be included in this gathering and asked to speak on behalf of Teofilo, who's a mentor to me, a friend, and finally a colleague. While his influence will certainly be the focus of my talk here today, I do want to acknowledge up front my debt and gratitude to others here today, all colleagues and friends of Teofilo's as well, of course. George, Hernandez, Luis and Jorge, Frank Martinez, Roberto, Rocco Cheo, Douglas Duani, and of course, Liz and Andreas. Thank you all. Together with Teofilo, you really gave me the direction in my professional life. I'll pass that. So, I grew up in the quintessential New England town of Guilford, Connecticut, along Long Island Sound in New Haven County. It is shown here on the left side in the classic 19th century bird's eye view that John Reps collected and brought to us in his scholarship and books. And on the right is the house I grew up in my teens, the so-called Saltbox Cottage, built 40 years before the Declaration of Independence. We subsequently moved to a much more modern house, still within Guilford, built in 1845. In any case, I was a callow young man who had little appreciation for my historic and rather quaint surroundings. And more importantly, I could not stand the cold, interminable winters in New England. I was determined to move to warmer climes for my college years. My father was an architect as well, now retired. And so I fell upon his stack of architectural record magazines. I'm not sure if that exists anymore, but this was back in the mid-'80s. And they would review a half a dozen schools once a year in one of their issues. And I came upon UM's School of Architecture review, and it convinced me that together with the work I saw that was being produced there, as well as its location in the Caribbean, as it were, was where I needed to be. And so it didn't take long for me to confirm this decision. I found my calling that first year in no small part due to Teofilo, one of my design studio professors in that first year. He had assigned us as a project in addition to the Villa Snellman by Gunnar Asplund on the left there. I was wholly ignorant of Asplund and a little mystified that we would be designing a modest addition to a rather innocuous little Swedish cottage. Nonetheless, I trusted his judgment and took it upon myself to learn more about Asplund's work. It ended up opening up a world to me in the ensuing years, for which I'll forever be indebted to Teofilo. Indeed, the summer before I started grad school, together with my wife, Marianne, who's also a partner in our architectural practice, We made a month-long pilgrimage to Scandinavia with the express purpose of visiting the works of Asplund and his contemporaries, both in Sweden and in other Scandinavian countries. Needless to say, it completely validated his introduction and deepened my gratitude to him even further. So, what also had an equally profound effect on me was the so-called New London Studio. You've heard about this now a couple times from previous speakers. It was essentially the inaugural Open City Studio, the first of that kind. And it was in my third year I attended this. I think it was 1990. And John Steffian, also previously mentioned, the founding dean of UM School of Architecture, had invited faculty from UM to come to New London, Connecticut for a design studio to engage with the city. Teofilo and George, along with Luis and Jorge, directed our efforts. It was a real homecoming for me. Both my parents had grown up and met in New London, and I had many childhood visits there with grandparents who still resided there. But I saw it all with new eyes in the company of my Miami mentors. Vincent Scully in Between Two Towers remarked that, quote, New England was seen by them, the Anglos, touched as they had been by the Latin spirit, with an astonished wonder and clarity. He perfectly captured the sentiment that underlay the two drawings I ended up producing in the studio. The one on the left is a sort of distillation of New England as colonial township. In essence, it was my hometown of Guilford. And then a view of the post-industrial whaling city of New London in the present day, with a modest architectural project inserted alongside the whaling row you see on the white manses and the bridge beyond. After graduation, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but also knew I needed to work for it first, completing my internship and gaining licensure. I had the great good fortune to find myself in the employ of Jorge and Luis, aka Treyas Architects. My luck was compounded by the fact that they had, as they just spoke of, struck up a collaborative relationship with Teofilo at the time. And so I was treated to essentially a personal and professional apprenticeship that was in effect an extension of my studio years at UM. And all that, and I collected a paycheck along the way. So the time came after an equally fulfilling experience working at DPZ with Liz, mostly, when it made sense to make my way to graduate school, in this case, Yale. UM had something of a connection to the school through Liz and Andreas, but that connection was made concrete with Vincent Scully's engagement with UM. He had chosen to spend the winter semester teaching, this is after his retirement, his active retirement, to spend the winter semester teaching in Miami while maintaining his professorship emeritus at Yale. That, along with my personal connection to New Haven through Guilford, sealed the deal, and I decided to attend there. However, not wholly to my surprise, the design studios there proved to be an exercise in frustration, driven by esoteric academic theory and only incidentally concerned with architectural design. But I was relieved to learn that there was also a small graduate research program within the school, the so-called MED, Master of Environmental Design, a largely self-directed 2-year research program that was a vestige of the 70s. And I only had 3 fellow graduate students in it, besides myself. I transferred to it in that first semester. However, I was left to come up with a topic to engage my efforts, my research efforts. And I was saved by Pat Pinnell, a classmate and colleague of Liz and Andreas's, who taught at Yale. He suggested I might look into New Haven's unique urban history, given my background in urbanism at UM, and he agreed to be my thesis advisor. And then good fortune once again intervened as Vincent Scully and his wife Tappy informed me that they had been approached by the powers that be at Yale to write a book on Yale and New Haven's urban and architectural history. Would I want to contribute? Gulp. Sure. It was a bit overwhelming, but nonetheless, entirely fulfilling experience. So I won't bore you with all the historical background to the research and eventual book, but I saw an opportunity with Pat and Vince's encouragement to elucidate the written work with drawings, and specifically ones that availed themselves of what I'd learned under Teofilo and others in the traveling studios. To graphically represent the research into a place and time that expressed its nature and form. And so I produced several such drawings tied to the relevant chapters in research. The first of which was a God's eye view of the famous 9-square plan of the New Haven colony, set within its distinctive landscape. On the left is I believe an original colonial drawing of the settlement of New Haven and its famous 9 squares and central green. And so I took that as a basis to create a drawing that collects, well, I'll say it, I won't unpack all the allegorical and religious references contained within it, but in its essence, it resonated to me, especially in relation to Teofilo's vision and conception of the so-called inaugural moment, the depiction of a city's essential founding and meaning. And this one is especially fraught, shall we say, given its biblical foundations. So I also ended up, besides doing research in a chapter on the original 9-square plan, writing chapters on the development of the so-called Old Brick Row, Yale's original campus in the early 19th century. And it's shown on the left and on the right. New Haven's Civic Improvement Plan of 1910, along with John Russell Pope's 1919 plan for a new Yale campus. The drawings I produced for these fall into the two types that Scully had categorized in Between Two Towers. The Old Brick Row is of the documentary type, a bird's eye view of the actual campus, but unlike so many contemporaneous depictions, it is seen facing out to the adjoining New Haven Green and the city beyond, uniting both college and town. This was an especially important aspect to Vince, who had always pushed against Yale's conception of itself as somehow separate from the city. And he wanted to, in some ways, show that that indeed is not the case, and that New Haven is essential to Yale's history and development. And then the drawing on the right is the so-called composite type, combining both the city and campus master plans of the early 20th century that I earlier mentioned, the New Haven Civic Program of 1910 and Pope's campus plan. And it combines them into one continuous urban tableau, a vision of what could have been for the city and the college. Neither plans were implemented, alas, though James Gamble Rogers' development of the Yale campus in the 20s and 30s owes a significant debt to Pope's vision. So in any case, after Yale, Marianne and I decided to move back to Miami after I completed my thesis, and the book subsequently came out, and we started up our own practice. Not very long after that, Andreas commanded us to be the founding town architects for Alice Beach in the Florida Panhandle, not unlike the fate of Teofilo at Seaside 20 some odd years earlier, in his case being left behind. And 20 years forward of that, just last year, of course, we found ourselves back in Stockholm at a conference with fellow architects and designers. As fate would have it, Marianne and I were in Asplin's city library when we got word of Teofilo's passing. That evening, we had a reception in Ragnar Osberg's City Hall. Osberg was a mentor of Asplin's, much as Teofilo had been a mentor to me, to many of us. Needless to say, I was shaken up by the news and had little interest in socializing that evening. So I made my way out to the Fundamenta adjoining the city hall that overlooked the city, what you see there on the left. I found myself in the company of a sea goddess there, which you also see, and took note of her outstretched hand, which held some sort of instrument. In the moment, all I could think of that it could be, given the news that it was a drawing stylus. Final reminder of what Teofilo had bequeathed to me and to all of us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Edgar Sarli. I'm a faculty member here at the School of Architecture, and I practice along with my wife and partner, Tamar Löw, at Löw Sarli Architect. I'm a former student of Teofilo, like many of us here, a colleague teaching here together in studio, many courses, reviews, and we were also friends, like many of us here. I do thank you all for being here on this beautiful, rainy afternoon. And the title of my presentation is Casif to Visit, a Theoretical Journey. Teofilo Victoria was or is a universal man. Through a conventional reading of time, he was. On the other hand, as time is not absolute, we could hypothesize that human existence, relative to the history of the universe, is merely an instant. During that instant, our existence collapses in time, and we could deduce that everything that has happened and is yet to happen is happening simultaneously. Therefore, as we are gathering here in this classroom today, he is. During the spring of 2022, he gave a lecture about two consequential projects of the La Guardia Victoria architects and urbanists. This was part of the research phase of the building studio, as he would like to call the integrated studio. And the lecture was titled House Story, or Two Houses, One Family, and Two Passive Environmental Control Artifacts. And it was, indeed, about Casif and Visit. These two houses are located, and I say are located, less than 2 miles away, and were designed in a span of 30 years. They were presented considering the main objectives of the building studio, which is to foster a thinking about architecture in harmony with its context, physical context, historical, cultural, and environmental. They were conceived with the same sensibility and were perfect examples to represent to the students tangible answers to the questions the studio intends to raise. And I'll note that the slides in this presentation, including the subtitles, are all taken from Teofilo's lecture. Besides this one and the title page, everything else is taken from his lecture. So the analysis of these two houses as a pair, because of the consistency in the variables such as client, location, program, and zoning, allows us to draw conclusions that are directly related to the fundamental ideas of the design. Casif is their first build project. It was done in collaboration with Tomás López Gotardi, who's here, who was the architect of record, and Visit, a more recent one. I will define them as the opposite ends of a theoretical journey that has distinguished their work as identifiable, unique, and above all, beautiful. Casif is decisively rational, belonging to a world of abstract ideas, and at the opposite end, Visit can be described as a building that comfortably coexists with earthly life, the poetic and the prosaic. Teofilo's comprehensive understanding of culture in universal terms, both in time and space, was clearly manifested in the conception of these two houses. The genealogy of ideas starts with Valdez Müller's Universalis Cosmographia of 1507. The first time America is depicted as a continent, as per Amerigo Vespucci's Mundus Novus. In light of this, the encounter of the Italian Renaissance with the New World with all its natural exuberance, is fundamental for Cassif's design. Embracing the sharp contrast between these two worlds with their own virtues offers fertile ground for an architecture conceived in dialectical terms. As he called it, the monument in the wilderness. Design is a mystery. It is centered certainly in the case of this masterpiece, as Vincent Scully, and we've heard today, was referred to. Despite their young age, Teofilo was 30 at the time and Maria was 26. A plethora of ideas tangled up like the gnarly branches of a mangrove tree, intertwined with a variety of sources of inspiration and experiences, come together at conscious and subconscious levels. There's a mirror in which Cassif can recognize herself, or at least an important aspect of her identity. The University of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson. The design of the monument in the wilderness is built upon contrasts. And this is certainly the case of Cassif. In Cassif, the contrast is with a very particular wilderness, a wilderness of our own, as Teofilo called it. And this wilderness of our own reveals remarkable similarities with the Venetian lagoon. Recalling Canaletto's invented Rialto Bridge on the Grand Canal, where the monument is an agent of transformation. I will quote now from Teofilo's lecture in three instances. Open quote. In the introduction to the American edition of the Architecture of the City, Aldo Rossi emphasizes the idea of the monument in the Americas. The monument is concise, and its memorial qualities would be essential in the establishment of some kind of organization, urban and architectural organization. This is part of a discourse of what architecture in the Americas might want to be, end quote. If the monument is the key to unlock or find what architecture in the Americas wants to be, Cassif embraces the quest. She confidently presents herself as part of a lineage of ideal houses that have contributed to shape the history of architecture. Rationally conceived, the plan of Cassif, here to the right, is composed with mathematical precision by rooms defined by 4 walls with proportions of 16 by 32, 16 by 16, and 16 by 8 feet. The circulation core is 4 feet wide, and at the center of the composition, a central atrium organizes the building in plan and section as a cube with 24 feet sides. Moreover, the clarity of its site plan and section also yields a rhythmic sequence of voids and solids from hammock to bay of monumental scale, both as a whole and within its parts. Perhaps the most monumental is the atrium, where the physical and the conceptual limit is the sky. The sky has no limits. Open quote. The atrium is a semi-public room that allows rain and light into the building, and most importantly, it lets hot air escape through the concluvium. It is a room that is simultaneously inside and outside, end quote. Cassif establishes a profound, almost existential dialogue with history. It exists only because the Italian Renaissance has arrived at the New World. The metaphysical existence of this platonically shaped ideal villa in the landscape does not need canonical orders. We can see the thinness of the walls in these plans. It needs order, but not orders. It is youthful and rebellious. At the time, thinking about architecture in relationship to history before Le Corbusier was sinful. Cassif does not stick to this norm. She delights in being different and defies an arbitrarily imposed dogma blindly followed by the majority. In this world of abstract ideas, Even the preserved hammock is rendered with sharply defined edges, talking about the rectangle to the left. Platonic, unreachable, and inaccessible. Diametrically opposed is the side garden at BC. It is inviting, grounded on earth, like the roots of the carefully relocated oak tree seen here at the end of this photograph. It is sensorial rather than rational. Texture, sense, the sound of the breeze passing through the canopy dominate the experience. BC does not invite us to think. Instead, she invites us to enjoy, and therefore to appreciate the generosity of our planet Earth. BC's genealogy takes us to Charleston, where the side yard typology defines an experience marked by the transition from the public realm into the private through the interstitial piazza, that is, as is colloquially referred to. The piazza or loggia, facing the side garden, is the heart of BC. It is the central architectural element of the design and of the daily activities taking place in this house. Living, returning, sitting, eating, reading, sharing are all linked by it. This is where the design of BC is most radically different to its predecessor. The side garden harmoniously permeates into the house through a loggia that runs the entire length of the main two-story volume that offers two front elevations, one facing the side garden with a southwest orientation and one facing historic South Miami Avenue, offering, I quote from Teofilo's lecture, a curious experience of entering a building from the outside and remaining on the outside, end quote. The open pediment marking the entrance gently reaches the entablature that will run the entire length of the main body of the house facing the garden. This facade is composed using the elements of architecture found in traditional buildings. Columns support a deliberately present horizontal element whose weight grounds the building on its side. If Kazif looks up to the sky, BC gently rests on earth. Arriving at the piazza, we encounter another major distinction between these two buildings, the use of canonical orders. In Kazif, the elements are reduced to their minimum. The transition from vertical to horizontal elements and planes is resolved by the inevitable 90-degree angle. Contrarily, BC offers pleasure to the eye on the articulation of the different elements and their connections. The choice of the Tuscan order, materialized in Corallina, is a manifestation of the uncompromised embracement of traditional principles and, in turn, a more humanist architecture. Thank you.
Everyone hear me back there? I'm a little tall. Okay, yeah, this was designed for Teofilo's height, I think. They say you can judge a man by the company he keeps. You are the company he kept. There was a lot to look forward to here today. The wonderful presentations, the beautiful work that surrounds us, some of the juicy stories. Thank you, Andres. But what I looked forward to the most about being here today was the chance to be able to spend time with all of you. In your company, I feel comforted, a sense of belonging, a home. And I'm from Wisconsin. That says an awful lot about the man who brought us all here together today. So today I have the privilege of sharing insights from the recent work of the Open City Studio, an itinerant summer travel studio co-founded by Teofilo and comprised of faculty, myself included, the students of architecture. And the work I'll speak to is the most recent. It's centered on the infrastructure of Japan and its relationship with the natural world, particularly that water. The Himeji Castle is not easily reached. In fact, for our group of Miami professors who had just arrived to Kansai International Airport earlier that morning and wanted to scout it for a future itinerary, it required 5 unique modes of transportation to get there. First, a shuttle from the airport to a ferry station, then the ferry across Osaka Bay to the Kobe Airport, which connects to an elevated rail line heading towards Kobe Station. From there, you'll find a regional train to the town of Himeji, once an important political hub in feudal Japan. An organized bus depot awaits you at Himeji with a stop just outside the castle gate. Or if you are in a rush, as we were, you'll find a taxi stand with white-gloved drivers awaiting you. The castle closed at 5 p.m. that day. Ticket sales stopped at 4 p.m. We arrived at 4:05. Now, for this Miami audience, you might think we were relatively early. But I can assure you that in Japan, we were precisely 5 minutes late. And so upon our rejection to the castle gates, we regrouped over a coffee, agreeing that the journey presented a different kind of revelation. The day was not filled with overt beauty, but with a quieter elegance found in the flawless choreography of infrastructure. It was a reminder that beauty is not always in the extraordinary, but very often in the mundane. In many ways, the group has always been aware. Early student research projects in Tokyo included curiosities, such as car elevators, found neatly tucked in between office and residential neighborhoods and buildings, accessed by turnstiles at their bases. This drawing demonstrates the end result, a compositional drawing incorporating the documental research, as was the case with a great variety of labyrinthian subway maps. The student collected these maps and produced a usable map with cherry blossoms and chrysanthemums leaves marking the station location. Everyday infrastructure was not necessarily the subject of the early drawings. With so much overt beauty, drawings understandably focused on umbrellas and fans and hairstyle, all depicted in vivid color, hand-drawn and rooted in the rigorous documentation of the cultural artifacts. The journey to Himeji was not filled with that type of beauty, yet how could taking so many modes of transportation, all pleasantly working as they should, flawlessly for their constituents, not be considered beautiful? Many of you know about the Open City Studio. You've heard many things about it today. Many alums of the program are here, and I'm one of them. Moving through the city quickly, always trying to catch up to the impossibly ambitious itinerary, arriving 5 minutes late, but still finding beauty in the path. This may all sound familiar to you. Most will not know, however, that the past few years were devoted to the subject of water, specifically how water shapes the architecture and urbanism of Tokyo, a subject relevant, very relevant for us here in Miami. For the sake of time, I'll share with you a glimpse of this, citing 3 examples emblematic of a much larger collection of projects and research. Kiyomizu-dera stands as a testament to the inherent relationship between human culture and the natural world. Perched on the verdant slopes of the Ottawa Mountain, its iconic wooden stage, constructed without nails, exemplifies the harmony of architecture and landscape. The temple, named after pure water of the waterfall, reflects a cultural reverence for nature's life-giving forces, while its spiritual practices, like drinking from the waterfall streams, link ecological phenomenon with human aspirations for health, longevity, and wisdom. Yet, Kiyomisadera is not untouched nature. It is a cultivated space shaped by centuries of human devotion and ingenuity. Founded in 778 and dedicated to the Canon, the goddess of mercy, the temple has been built, disassembled, and rebuilt many times, a Japanese philosophy of preservation rooted in impermanence. This practice, echoing themes of adaptability, offers a model for addressing modern challenges like sea level rise, an ephemeral yet enduring approach to coexistence with an ever-changing environment. The student depiction shows the temple from an unexpected point of view, below the stage, amongst the forest of columns, displaying the joinery techniques. There is seemingly no limit to the height of the structure. Here it is depicted with water at the base and a setting sun. The valley disappears and the context is now universal. It becomes an allegory for the adaptable city, built and rebuilt as needed to adapt. Completed in 2006, this monumental feat of engineering, designed to manage and store floodwaters at the convergence of 5 rivers. The subterranean system features 5 massive silos, 4 miles of tunnels, and a cathedral-like water pressure control tank known as the underground temple. The facility protects Tokyo from typhoons, heavy rainfalls, and overflowing rivers, safeguarding millions of lives and the urban environment. It exemplifies the intersection of technological ingenuity and ecological necessity. While it tames the chaotic forces of water, the channel also underscores humanity's dependence on and vulnerability to the natural world. Its creation once again reflects Japan's deep awareness of impermanence and its capacity for resilience. By embedding adaptability into the urban fabric, the underground channel offers not only a practical solution to contemporary climate challenges, but also a vision of how built environments can coexist harmoniously with dynamic, unpredictable natural systems. I should mention that in the last few years, this was, as soon as the students arrived, we met them at the first day at the hotel, take the train directly to this, you know, bypassing all of the anime and manga and everything else that, and all of the greatness of the city that it has to offer, and take them here. I mean, it was a profound, I think, kind of journey, and really set the stage to what the studio was really all about. The student drawing of the subterranean structure is rendered in gouache and ink. Again, unexpectedly, the point of view is not how one typically experiences that memorable space, but rather underwater. In this case, a worm's eye plan perspectival view shows the location of the great hypostyle columns in relation to each other. The drawing imagines the chamber flooded with water, you on your back, the waters flowing through. Ishigashi refers to the traditional stone walls used in Japanese architecture. Rising from the earth in steep fan-shaped slopes, these walls are built without mortar. Their interlocking stones absorb the shifting pressures of earthquakes and resist the erosive forces of time. Excuse me, embodying a philosophy that strength emerges from flexibility and collaboration with natural forces. Yet the Ishigashi are more than practical. They are evidently cultural. And the art and craft of building them, like the art and craft of building temples, continues to be practiced. Their shape embodies the slopes of mountains and volcanoes and reminds us that even the act of fortification is rooted in coexistence with nature. In their enduring presence, we find a lesson that human resilience depends not on dominating the natural world, but on working within its rhythms, adapting to its inevitabilities. The student composition here, drawn by hand, ink on mylar, was completed during Teofilo's last trip to Japan. I show it not only because it's beautifully drawn and labored, it is, but when I see it, I'll always remember it as the last great drawing that occupied his mind. Tegan Polizzi, a very talented recent graduate, had been struggling to find the right composition. She drew variations in perspective and plan and elevation, but it wasn't quite there. Teofilo's great skill was being able, with just a few strokes of his pen in his sketchbook, to distill the subject to its critical points and arrive at a clear and beautiful composition. I learned from him to never lower the standard of excellence. Teofilo visited the site again with Tegan in the final week of the program and proposed the change. He knew it would result in a drawing that would likely be unfinished, but he also knew that if she finished it on her own during the summer, it would likely make it into the pantheon of great open city studio drawings, as Abdeep likes to refer to them. She did, and it has. And I should say, has anyone ever seen Teofilo take a photograph? I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but apparently when it does, they're quite beautiful. So in conclusion, while the Open City Studio has engaged with a broad spectrum of topics, its recent work has concentrated on the subject of water, revealing it as a driving force behind built forms that become cultural artifacts, profound expressions of Japan's historical, ecological, and architectural heritage. Spiro Kostov, in A History of Architecture, urges scholars and students to embrace a narrative that includes all built forms, regardless of scale, status, or apparent importance. He terms this the community of architecture and advocates that the story of architectural history be told within this broader context. Kostov draws upon Vitruvius, who distinguishes venustas, beauty, from utilitas, function, and fernitas, structure. Kostov emphasizes that beauty elevates building into art, the art of architecture, and acknowledges that in the modern period, architecture has been distinguished from works driven primarily by function or profit. In Japan, the architectural response to water is both omnipresent and nuanced. Sometimes this relationship is emphasized beautifully and obviously. More often, however, the relationship between nature and built form is often subtle, overlooked, or seemingly ordinary in appearance. While water infrastructure is typically analyzed through the lenses of function and structure, the act of drawing reveals how these systems often embody beauty. We get to beauty by drawing and drawing deeper. In Japan, water infrastructure transcends its utilitarian origins, elevating elements as varied as stone embankments, canal networks, the subterranean drainage systems into profound expressions of cultural identity worthy of study. The story of water in Japan is one of persistence and quiet ubiquity. It threads its way through the city, shaping everything it touches, from the masterful profiles of temple eaves, such as Meiji Jingu, designed to shield against relentless seasonal rains, to the unassuming gutters at the bases of buildings and streets, which channel rainwater in labyrinthian paths that parallel the movement of millions every day. These examples serve as reminders of how beauty and utility converge in the smallest details. Whether celebrated expressions or hidden in plain sight, they tell a story of integration, of a country shaped by its enduring relationship with water. I think Teofilo was as impactful as he was because he was always discovering and and he was open to sharing that excitement he felt about those discoveries with all of us. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is George Stoltz. I'm a writer, art critic, curator, sometimes teacher. I met Teofilo in 1980, Columbia University. I was an undergraduate studying ancient Greek and classics. He was the graduate student in architecture. And we didn't meet on campus. We met in a coffee shop. And we started talking, and we pretty much never stopped. We did other things than talk. We traveled together, we worked together. We had worked on projects together, publications together, including one that's unfinished, but we do hope to finish. And it does occur to me, this has occurred to me just sitting here this evening, when I think of Teofilo, I do think of these ideas, these projects. There was always a new project. And I have to say, we worked a lot on those projects, even though many of them never saw the light of day. So I think there could be a compendium of projects by Teofilo Victoria, which were never realized. And that would be quite a portrait of Teofilo. I volunteered to form part of it. My main, I guess, more tangible participation or collaboration with Teofilo was through the Open City Studio. Many places, many years, in some ways even prior to the Open City Studio. Teofilo's first itinerant or international program was 1984 in Rome. It was about Rome. It was not it wasn't a traveling, although we traveled all around Italy. Maria was there, Gina was there, perhaps some others were there. That was many years ago. But my participation did continue through the Open City Studio, off and on, not constant. So what I'm going to present today is a very reduced version of a lecture which I gave in different forms, in different places, different contexts, obviously, and also in different scale, to the Open City Studio, to the students of the Open City Studio, to Teofilo, to myself. This lecture, I've chosen this lecture because I do feel it does reflect something of Teofilo's thinking, of my own thinking, and of the convergence of our thinking. El río me arrebata, y soy ese río. The river sweeps me away, and I am the river. Jorge Luis Borges. What is a river? How do we define and impose some ontological finitude to something as fluid and as changeable as a river? Is the river a place? Is it the area between the more or less parallel riverbanks and from the headwaters to the mouth? In other words, the riverbed? Or is the river perhaps water, the water? The water, which is probably our most palpable experience of a river, the physical experience of a river. But to say that a river is water is clearly incomplete. Is the river the flow of the water, almost as if a river were not a thing, but rather an event, an occurrence, something that is happening more than something that is. A definition of a river is elusive. It slips through the net of words that we use to try to catch it, like the river itself. If we do think about the water, we have to keep in mind that there is much in that water that is not, in fact, H2O. As the potamologists and the river experts explain, every river has what is called its load, the eroded material transported by that flowing water. The load can be anything from dissolved materials to small grains of rock or clay. That too is the river. But if small grains of rock or clay are what a river is, what about a chip of wood? What about a leaf, a branch, a twig? What about a log, a floating log? Well, what about a boat? What about a man who owns a boat, works on the boat, lives in the boat, perhaps dies on the boat, in the Chao Phraya in Bangkok? Where do we stop and say, this belongs to the river and this does not? Or rather, this is the river and this is not. And beneath that surface, that incredible surface tension, that meeting of water and air, is a microscopic river-borne germ in or a part of a river? Are the plants that thrive in the river? The entire ecosystem within the river? A fish? A fish which has the river flowing through it, even as it flows through the river. El río me arrebata, y soy ese río. The river sweeps me away, and I am the river. The river is a system. It begins in snowmelt and rainfall high in the mountains. Then those small, fast-moving, high-energy streams begin to converge. And at the same time, the river erodes a cleft into the earth. And the underground water supplies join the river's flowing water. The river changes the surface of the land as it meanders, straightens, floods. We speak of landscape. We might better speak of riverscape. The river is not only a system unto itself. This river is a system within a system, a cycle, the water cycle. And just as that river is always moving, water itself is always changing states. That vast cycle, the hydrological cycle, ice caps, aquifers, springs, frost, fog, cloud, snow, rain, mist, hail, floods, and so much more. And that cycle is a closed cycle. As is said, truthfully, all the water that ever was, is. That segment of this cycle, this fixed vast cycle that we call the river, is in fact a minuscule part of that cycle, of the overall water cycle. According to the potamologists, this is 0.00001%. But to us, humans, we who are 60% water, the river possesses an importance of a far different magnitude. Our shift from hunter-gatherers to the technological farmers and builders that we are today, a shift so great as to possibly have amounted to a genetic mutation, was always directly related to a proximity to the river, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, the Nile. Agriculture, transportation, generated power, currency, written language, architecture, all developed by and because of the river. The river's importance to us is not only technological. The river has been venerated as a divine spirit by us, a god or goddess to be appeased or to be feared. The river has been sacrificed to human sacrifice. In Genesis, the river flows out of the Garden of Eden and becomes the four rivers of paradise. The Greeks spoke of crossing the river Styx as a metaphor for death, with the river as a barrier between one world and the next. The River Jordan was where John baptized Jesus Christ. Baptism also symbolizing a crossing from one world into the next. And that same River Jordan was so often conflated with the Mississippi River, heartbreakingly conflated by the African-American slaves in the American South. And that River Jordan, like the River of Babylon and even the Nile, were rivers of tears, another thing that flowed. Crossing the Rubicon, as Caesar did when embarking on the civil war that was to change Rome. Rome, the eternal city built on a bend in the Tiber. That phrase came to mean, and has come to mean, making a decision from which there is no going back. Alea jacta est. The list flows on. El río me arrebata, y soy ese río. The river sweeps me away, and I am the river. Borges' poem is titled Heraclitus. The Greek philosopher who more than anyone before or since looked to the river as a source of understanding, the question, the paradox really, of how permanence and change can and do coexist in the world, in our experience of the world, in ourselves. Like the Greeks of his time, Heraclitus avoided resorting to magic or talk of spirits or even theology when seeking to come to an understanding of this paradox. Instead, he sought a unifying principle and found one in the principle that change itself is what is permanent. Change, nothing else. Pantare, everything is in flux. That is probably Heraclitus' simplest expression of this principle. But also, you cannot step into the same river twice. For although, or rather just as, the river is constantly changing and yet remains the river. You, I, all of us are constantly changing from birth to death, and yet we remain ourselves. The river always follows its course, whatever that course may be. That is its logos, the plan or pattern along which it changes and through which it changes, and at the same time by which and through which it remains the same, just as we do. Our DNA codes. Like a temple in Japan, built and rebuilt, out of wood, hundreds, nearly thousands of years old, and yet new. Like Theseus' ship, every plank replaced over the course of its journey, and yet still Theseus' ship upon its return to Athens, even when Theseus does not return. Like the bricks of a destroyed city, Ayutthaya, high on the Chao Phraya, bricks thrown into and retrieved from and transported along the river, where they were reconfigured into the city of Bangkok. Like a university program, like the Open City Studio. Students come and go, faculty come and go, and yet it remains the Open City Studio. El río me arrebata y soy ese río. The river sweeps me away, and I am the river. I asked at the start of this talk whether the river might be thought of not as a thing, but perhaps as an event, an occurrence, something that is happening rather than something that is. I ask this same question of thing versus event here today in the context of the students of the Open City Studio. Students who are studying to be architects and are doing so through drawing. through your drawings. So I might also ask, as I asked of the river, are your drawings things or are your drawings events? This time I will answer. They're both. Your drawings, the students who are hearing my lecture, your drawings are a particular sort of drawing. These are drawings that contain and transmit insight, the action of insight through the physicality of sight. They are vedute, but into something less tangible than the physical world, but they exist in the tangible. These static drawings contain movement, the high energy movement of understanding, of listening to the logos. And they then transmit and share that logos via the drawing itself. In this way, your drawings should not be considered as things, as beautiful as they are as things. Your drawings are also events, they're actions, they're occurrences. They are things that happen as much as they are things that are. They are the unity of content and discourse, the way the river is the unity of water and the flow of water. They are like the river. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Adib Kure. I'm a faculty member at the School of Architecture. Teofilo Victoria was my teacher. Teofilo Victoria was my friend. A love for the marvelous, a belief in the marvelous. That is how I remember my dear friend and mentor, Teofilo Victoria. He was a wise gentleman with a cultivated mind and a poetic soul. His presence was a blessing in my life, and his friendship was marked by generosity, humor, and an unshakable integrity. What quality did he possess that elevated him above most people I have known? Was it his constant pursuit of excellence, his poetic way of seeing the world, or the quiet conviction with which he lived his life? Perhaps it is the intangible combination of all these characteristics that set him apart. Teofilo and I shared a love for the Caribbean, a good joke, and a passion for travel. For over 20 years, we traveled the world together to experience the fantasies of real life and para que no nos echen cuentos, as Teofilo would say. Cartagena, Rome, Key West, where it all began, Vicenza, Cambodia, Tokyo, Bacoli, that small Italian town near Naples where, alongside Carrie Penaba, we went in search of Piranesi's Piscina Mirabilis, shared mozzarella di bufala, and listened to stories of Teofilo's father and his childhood along the edges of a timeless beach. Ours was a bond of friendship and learning. From him, I came to appreciate the ancient teachers of our craft, Vitruvius, Alberti, and Palladio, alongside Pacioli, Piranesi, and Giotto. He introduced me to the enigmatic and the metaphysical in architecture, Aldo Rossi, the Chirico Sironi, and others who saw poetry in the ordinary. Most importantly, I learned from him how to teach, how to treat students with kindness, generosity, and patience. His greatness was not just in his accomplishments, but in his ability to live with grace, humor, and an unyielding sense of wonder. And this wonder informed how he approached architecture and life, seeing the world not as a fixed system, but as a dialogue between past and present, tradition and innovation, the local and the universal. In the winter of 2017, we were invited to China to participate in an international workshop hosted by the Shanghai Academy of Fine Arts and Shanghai University. The workshop focused on Dashilar. Dashilar, a historic district located south of Tiananmen Square, just outside the ancient city walls of Beijing, is a charming place where history and everyday life converge in a way that is both intricate and revealing, standing as a testament to the organic, unplanned nature of urban development. Unlike the absolute rationality of Beijing's imperial city, Dashilar evolved in a more spontaneous, informal way, shaped less by top-down planning than by the practical needs of its inhabitants over centuries. With roots dating back to the Ming Dynasty, the district remains a vibrant and functional part of the city. In contrast to the strict order of many modern urban grids, Dashilar's narrow, winding streets reflect a vernacular urbanism, one that emerges not from official mandates, but from the practical, often invisible actions of its people. One bitterly cold afternoon, Teofilo and I set out to walk Dashilar's snow-covered streets. Amidst a seemingly endless sea of bicycles, the incomprehensible calls of street vendors, and the unfamiliar rhythms of music, time seemed to shift, stretching and folding in ways that felt distinct from our usual perception. How many such walks had I taken with Teofilo throughout the years? My greatest lessons about cities and architecture were revealed during these shared peripatetic explorations, lessons that felt less like formal instruction and more like unexpected discoveries. These walks immersed us in the world of architecture and its context, slowly revealing truths that remain ever present in my mind. How rare such experiences are in academia today. Bound by physical classrooms or mediated through digital platforms, modern pedagogy struggles to replicate the richness and immediacy of this immersive, experiential way of learning, a methodology for which Teofilo was a master. Our walk through Dashilar reminded us of the perennial beginnings of towns, of foundational traces visible in the patterns of informal settlements to this day, patterns that evoked memories of places we had both walked in Cartagena, where empirical and organic growth arises from necessity rather than from formal planning. And as in Cartagena, the buildings here tell stories of migration, trade, and shifting cultures. From the ancient hutang, with its humble courtyard houses, to newer commercial spaces, the district embodies the continuous flow of life that has shaped it. This blend of historical depth and ongoing vitality makes Dashilar a rich yet comprehensible example of how urban environments develop organically, responding to the needs of their inhabitants. Indeed, we recognized it as a place to be treasured, a highly legible urban fragment, cohesive and integral, conveying in its distinct form and presence a meaning and narrative that resonate as both an urban artifact and a work of art. What was most striking about Dashilar is how it reflects the dynamics of informal urban growth. Contemporary street vendors occupy the same spaces as centuries-old structures, and the rhythm of everyday life, the sounds of children playing, the smell of fresh laundry drying in courtyards, transcends the physical architecture itself. This active layering of time creates a unique energy within the district, making it an urban form that tells a story of real lived experience, one that evolves in direct response to the actions and needs of its people. At the same time, Dashilar is a district in continuous transformation. The signs of modernization are evident, with redevelopment projects threatening to alter its character irreversibly. Yet its essence, its informal, spontaneous nature, remains rooted in the rhythms of everyday life. This raises an essential question for urbanism. How can we honor and learn from such places without imposing external ideas about what a city should be? Dashilar, with its organic growth, offers a compelling argument for understanding cities as living entities shaped by time, necessity, and people. Dashilar projects a definition and identity of its own. Like Henry James' figure in the carpet, Dashilar's urban fragment invites multiple interpretations, yet remains elusive. Removed from its temporal and spatial context, Dashilar takes on the semblance of an archaeological artifact, its block and street patterns recalling the shattered fragments of a broken vase. These pieces evoke the whole, with their shape and geometry revealing an emblematic identity that is at once local and universal. And this interplay between time and form underscores the unpredictable influence of history on the molding of urban space. Our brief visit to Dashilar left an indelible impression, reinforcing our belief that vernacular architecture is not a static relic of the past, but a dynamic expression of ongoing cultural and social life. Dashilar showed us that such places are not merely about buildings, but about how these environments shape and are shaped by the collective consciousness of their inhabitants. This understanding lies at the heart of our philosophy. Back in Miami, with Carrie Penabel, I had been developing a series of studios and seminars under the title Vernacularology, some of these studios we co-taught with Teofilo. These studios aim to uncover the cultural, morphological, typological, and constructive aspects of regional architectural forms, seeking what is elemental and significant. The inquiry is not confined to vernacular architecture and urbanism of the distant past, but also embraces contemporary solutions born from present-day cultural, economic, and political circumstances. From the study of thatch and wooden bohíos to the analysis of informal settlements in Latin America, these investigations explore forms that, though formally and culturally distinct, exemplify resilience through their essential qualities. The exploration of the vernacular, in particularly the influence of popular culture on shaping cities and architecture, has a long-standing tradition at the University of Miami School of Architecture. Projects produced in the vernacularology studios draw from the school's rich tradition of representation, rooted, as many of you know here, in the 1990s, when digital technologies were beginning to replace time-tested conventions of architectural drawing. Some of the most evocative examples of this period are captured in Vincent Scully's Between Two Towers, where the works of Lynn, Hernandez, and Victoria illustrate the school's ethos. Yet the production of evocative drawings and projects defining the School of Miami, as described by Scully, continued well beyond the book's publication. This legacy, I would argue, lives on through the work of the vernacularology studios, a selection of first-year drawing courses, and most notably, the drawings of the Open City Studio. Each year, Teofilo struggled with the choice of destination for the Open City Studio summer program. Then one day, perhaps at the Versailles coffee window, and probably late at night, Teofilo asked in his typically charming way, "Hey, Joey, isn't it time we travel east?" And so in the summer of 2001, our explorations took us to Japan for the first time with Luis, Jorge, Carrie. Pet would join us a few years later, where we encountered sublime wooden temples and also the work of the observationists, an experience transformative to both our teaching and practice. In Japan, we discovered a lineage of architects, artists, and scholars whose meticulous attention to the everyday resonated deeply with our own inquiries. We found a kinship with Terunobu Fujimori and Gensei Akasegawa, founders of the Street Observation Society. Their activities blending historical fieldwork with a playful Dadaist sensibility, sought beauty in ordinary, overlooked places. Fujimori and Akasagawa's work revealed a profound appreciation for the character and identity of place, merging careful analysis of architectural artifacts with the joy of uncovering the unexpected. This quasi-scientific exploration of the mundane offered a fresh perspective on the vernacular, not as an esoteric pursuit, but as a rigorous investigation into the essential qualities of everyday life. Their work underscored the importance of observation, documentation, and rediscovering beauty in overlooked details, influencing both our teaching and the structure of our studios. In the Open City studios, as well as in the vernacularology studios, we ask students to engage deeply with their context, documenting existing conditions through analog and digital means, and translating these into architectural projects that respond sensitively to the unique cultural environmental attributes of their sites. By exploring diverse drawing techniques, students record the often overlooked aspects of a place, using these observations to inform architectural solutions that aim to be both timeless and contextually grounded. These lessons, rooted in the study of vernacular traditions and the careful observation of place, echoed powerfully as we walked the streets of Dashilar almost 2 decades after our first visit to Japan. Dashilar became a living testament to the principles we strive to teach, an intricate blend of the everyday and the extraordinary, shaped by the hands of time and the lives of its inhabitants. Reflecting on Dashilar, we recognize how its compelling beauty and coherent meaning lie not just in its physical form, but in the profound human connections embedded within it. Dashilar, in many ways, epitomized the principles learned from our studies of the vernacular, an embodiment of the beauty of the everyday, shaped by time, people, and context. And though the noble walls of the ancient city are no longer visible from Dashilar, and their echoes of joy, lamentation, or purpose have long since faded, their absence tells a story shared by countless cultural patrimonies dismembered from the built and social fabric of cities. These walls, irreverently dismissed and disdained, nonetheless underscore the importance of understanding cities, not only through their grand plans and monumental structures, but through their subtle, often invisible details that make a place unique. Through the vernacular, we uncover the deeper truths of a place, revealing the profound link between architecture and the lives it sustains. Teofilo's drawing. Without a doubt, Teofilo's poetical intensity and wisdom continues to guide us, both in teaching and practice. The constant reminder that architecture is not just about designing buildings, but about capturing the essence of a place, its culture, history, and people. That beauty also lies in the ordinary, and that the local and the universal are not opposing forces, but interconnected aspects of the same dialogue. Through the studios we teach, we aim to expand upon these lessons he taught, to teach with kindness and patience, to approach architecture with humility and wonder, and to search for that elusive balance between tradition and innovation, continuity and change. And meanwhile, his influence in an alliance of sentiment continues to shape my own understanding of architecture as a living tradition, one that celebrates the marvel of the everyday and seeks to connect the local to the universal in meaningful and enduring ways. Gracias, maestro.
Good evening. This image will remain on the wall while I close tonight's event because the images that I'm going to be speaking about you'll have the opportunity to see firsthand. My name is Carrie Penabad. I am an architect and a professor here at the School of Architecture, and it is my honor to be closing tonight's symposium with the introduction of its accompanying exhibition. The exhibition that you will see on display, both within the flanking walls of this hall, as well as the adjacent gallery, celebrate Teofilo's remarkable life and work. During his tenure, he guided generations of students, leaving an indelible mark on this institution and on the discipline of architecture. And I, like so many who have spoken here this afternoon, am the fortunate recipient of both his mentorship and friendship. But unlike Eric, I'm not going to describe myself as an ancient student. I'm going to describe myself as a timeless student. For Teofilo, architecture was inseparable from the cultural and historical context of a place and intimately tied to the making of cities. His work embodied a deep love of the discipline, driven by a relentless pursuit of excellence and beauty. Central to his teaching and practice was the act of drawing, a conceptual and crafted process that served as both a method of inquiry as much as a journey of discovery. The exhibition that you will see tonight focused principally on key aspects of Teofilo's pedagogical work, highlighting a series of drawings and models that reveal a shared ethos and an enduring love for architecture within the rich tapestry of urban culture. The drawings and the models on display emphasize the importance of observation and documentation in architectural education, celebrating the value of engaging deeply with existing contexts and built forms, ranging from modest vernacular buildings to canonical works of architecture that can both instruct and inspire. In two instances, we went beyond the display of student drawings to include competition entries co-authored with initially Roberto Bear and later with Jorge and Luis Treyes, alongside so many student teams. In essence, these works represent a bridge between academia and practice, a fruitful extension of the classroom that promoted a seamless and ongoing dialogue between faculty and students. The exhibition also includes the drawings of Kazif, Teofilo and Maria's early masterwork. These drawings reflect Teofilo's lifelong commitment to the art of architecture and the search for beauty. Their inclusion within an exhibition that is largely focused on Teofilo's pedagogy underscores the profound impact that this project had on both the theory and the drawings of the school. Amidst a world that is dominated by the rapid proliferation of disposable digital imagery, the collection on display here tonight invites us to pause and reflect on the more timeless lessons that architecture can offer. It reminds us to relentlessly pursue beauty, to cherish the craft of drawing, and to recognize our responsibility in shaping the future of our cities and our discipline. Teofilo's legacy is one of passion, precision, and profound respect for the history, culture, and the art of architecture, and this exhibition stands as a tribute to his extraordinary life and vision. Before concluding, I would like to thank Maria de la Guardia for her friendship, her commitment, and clarity of thought as we discussed and arranged the show that you will see tonight. Thanks to Dean El-Khoury for his unwavering support of tonight's events, and to George Hernandez for his leadership in organizing this afternoon's symposium. And finally, to Rick Lopez for organizing and curating the series of Habs drawings on display within this hall. Thanks also needs to be given to Nora, to Nicole, Joanne, Shafan, David, Asifa, Madison, Yvonne, Michael, Tyler, Myrna, Tammy, Merkin, Jordan, and so many others who made this event possible. But before we disperse, I would like to make one final request. Soon after Teofilo's passing, we established a memorial fund in his honor to cement his legacy at the school in perpetuity. Teofilo nurtured people as much as ideas, and I believe that the size of the crowd in this room is testament to this reality. So if Teofilo made an impact in your life in small or large ways, I ask you to please donate to the fund. No amount is too small or too large to ensure that the generosity of his spirit and the wisdom of his teachings can live on. Thank you all for coming, both from near and from far, and please join me now for the opening of the exhibition and reception in celebration of our beloved Teofilo.